Well, hello, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David the Skeptic, and today we are joined with Christians all around. We've got Dale from RSM. How you doing, Dale?
I'm good. I was suffering a little bit this morning, but around 11 things cleared up. So right now I'm doing good.
Oh, don't worry, my friend. The suffering has yet to begin. We've got Mr. Attack, if that's your real name, Mac Attack, from the board. I
Yep.
do believe that there might be some people very anxious to hear what you have to say today. We had a little bit of a dust up on the board.
Oh, I thought it was pretty friendly. All right.
Yeah. Oh no, it'll be very friendly, very friendly. We're on our best behavior, right? Boring. And of course, we have our other host holding it down, Mr. Russell, with a good first name. How you doing?
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Never
Good,
better.
good. Yeah,
Never better.
what's
Yeah.
going on over here on my side, but that's to be expected. But yeah, I'm doing well overall.
So this is the penultimate show of the season, folks. Penultimate, fancy word that means next to last. So it's coming down to the wire. We have this show. We have the skeptics responding with stuff. Maybe a stunt or two. Don't know. You'll just have to tune in next week. And then the season will be officially over. But after that, we will have Dale and Val in the official summer kickoff of the off season. Once again, I feel like I'm doing the off season all wrong because I'm starting it off with a show. But it is what it is. There will be other off-season shows as well. Hopefully not as many as there usually is because I'm tired. So that said, it's going to. Yeah, I am. I notice I haven't shaved in a few weeks.
That's fine.
And notice I didn't put on the eye patch
Little
this
rough.
week.
I'm a little
No,
rough too.
No eye patch. I haven't showered in a week. This is who I am, folks.
Dirty. Yeah.
Take
we
it
got
all
you.
in. Just take it in.
ODB, baby. ODB.
So that said, today's show, it's one that I've been looking forward to all year. A lot of shows come up as the season goes along because things happen, you have to stay flexible with your schedule to be able to deal with issues and topics that come up in the real world. And also issues that come up on the boards and that people write in about. And so you've got to be flexible with that. This one has been kind of on my mental whiteboard since the beginning of the season. I've been wanting to talk about this one for a long time. So I'm looking forward to it. And we're going to get into it. We're going to let the Christians talk with only one person pushing back this week. That's me. And so with no further ado, Satan, God of this world. Dale, start us off.
Let's get started because Andrew's getting a bit antsy there in the chat. All right, cool. So yeah, thanks for having me on to both Davids and that sort of thing. I see this as kind of sort of a do-over because as David Johnson will remember, back in our first season, we did a show on Satan and spiritual warfare and didn't go down the best. So yeah, hopefully this will be a better show with David Russell and Mac Attack helping me out. So Satan. So Satan goes by various names in the Bible. Obviously there is Satan, which means the adversary or the accuser. He also goes by other names, the devil, and Beelzebub or Beelzebul, which is that means Lord of the Flies. It's kind of like a Hebrew insult. In terms of the origin of Satan, so that's the first thing that we need to look at. I take sort of the traditional Christian view that Satan was an angel of God, and he and a bunch of other angels fell from heaven that rebelled against God and sinned against him. They fell from heaven, and now some of them were imprisoned in hell. Others were let loose upon the earth to basically attack God's plan and stuff like that. Satan is also called the god of this world, or the ruler of this world. In my research, there are two interpretations. So there's the traditional view where, okay, once Satan fell, he became a usurper of power over the earth. He usurped rulership over the earth. There's also another interesting interpretation that I don't think is correct, but in the Bible, angels are said to be powers or principalities over certain regions. So Michael is the angel; he governs the nation of Israel. I think it's Gabriel; he's over the prince of Persia or something like that. So there's another interpretation I came across where some people say, well, Satan himself, his domain was the world or the entire universe itself. God delegated that to Satan. And so that's why he's said to be the ruler of the world, even after he fell, and now he's messing it up. I personally don't take that view. I take more of the traditional view where he is usurping God's rulership. And obviously, God's plan was to have human beings as the image bearers of God. He delegated authority over creation and the earth to us to be the stewards of creation and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's in terms of the origin of Satan. That's what I've got here, and then I've got a bunch of other stuff. In terms of the historical development, I know some people in the comments were talking about that. So obviously, as a Bible-believing Christian, I believe the Bible's story about the origin of Satan. I don't believe that the concept of Satan was invented in the 6th century BC, copied from the Zoroastrian concepts of like a dualistic type concept. I think that that's historically unprovable and even perhaps historically false, and that sort of thing. And I think that skeptics who advocate for this kind of go for this parallelomania aspect, or what the ancient Hebrews called nephilokokagia, which is a fancy word for finding shapes in the clouds. So I think that's what the skeptics are doing when they go for this historical argument about how the concept of Satan developed. I think they're just finding shapes in the clouds type thing. Yeah. So in terms of the work of Satan and demons, what is it they do? So the first thing is that they blind unbelievers to the truth of the gospel message. Their second thing is that they seek to nullify the preaching and advancement of the kingdom. So that goes hand in hand with blinding unbelievers and that sort of thing. Satan and his demons also seek to destroy the servants of God in various ways, spiritually as well as even physically. The Apostle Paul talks about being physically afflicted and that sort of thing by demons and Satan's servants and that sort of thing. And then finally, Satan also accuses unbelievers, so that goes hand in hand with his name. So the Christian's response to that should be, number one, we should be focused, submitted to God and Jesus, and we are told to resist the devil with all we can. Part of our way of doing that is we should always be watchful and praying, and we should clothe ourselves with the full armor of God, as Ephesians chapter 6 says. So the last thing I guess I'll just touch on briefly, since it's not a part of this, but I also looked up proof for Satan possession or demon possession, and I kind of jotted down various categories of evidence. So number one, I think that there are experiences from trusted or credible testimonies. So I have examples from Dr. Mike Lacona as well as Dr. Craig Keener, who, as we know, David Johnson knows and likes them. He trusts them. So this should help provide an evidential basis of some sort. At least we can get past this is just a fraud, they're just lying type deal. I also have a couple examples of power encounters or religious contests where two or more religions go up against each other, and even examples of skeptical anthropologists and scholars who were basically like Darren Lute in the flesh. These Edith Turner is my example here, and after she experienced a demon, she became a hardcore believer, and she was the exact opposite before she saw these with her very own eyes. then my final category of demonic possession evidence is taking 5 categories of evidence from Dr. Ian Stevenson, who's probably the world's expert on evidence for reincarnation in Hinduism and that sort of thing. And I think that his categories of evidence are best explained by positing demon possession rather than reincarnation. So that's what I have on offer today. That's my opening speech.
Okay. So I just want to make a clarification. Already a clarification before we move on to opening statement number 2. So yes, Craig Keener, Mike Lacona, I do like them a lot. And I respect them as scholars. I do not trust their judgment on these matters, though. So I don't want you to associate like with trust. This is not a thing. I like my mother more, who is also a devout Christian. I do not trust her judgment in these matters at all. That doesn't mean that I don't like her and respect her. She's also a PhD. So
just one, do you mind if I just ask one quick question on that? Do you at least trust them in the reporting of facts, if not their judgment or interpretation of it, like the reporting of
the question of trust is probably bigger than I want to interrupt the flow of the show for already, but it's possible to trust someone generically without trusting them specifically or trusting them in a particular domain.
Okay.
So I don't believe, for instance, that Mike Lacona would tell me a bald-faced lie about this to my face for profit intentionally. I just don't think that would happen. That said, I think that his judgment can be clouded by any number of things, which would put any pronouncement that he made in certain domains at a lower trust level or acceptance level than when he's speaking in other domains, right? So there are lots of domains where people have some expertise at, and you can trust their word for it if you don't have any expertise in there. But that doesn't mean that those people can speak in any domain, and you should just accept their word for it. So I trust them in that. I don't think that they're trying to intentionally lie about it. I don't trust them in that. I think that they know what they're talking about in this domain. I think that there are a lot of people, for instance, who have stories about being abducted by aliens, who I would both like and trust that they're not lying. And yet I would not believe their story about being abducted. And Dale, I think that the same would be true for you. And so anyone who's listening to this who would say, well, David likes Mike and Gary, or Craig, so sure, whatever Dale says I guess we can believe. No, you can't. Don't make that association. That's simply not the case. But I do like them. I do think that there are people who are not telling stories for gain, and I think that you should listen to them in their areas of expertise and take with a grain of salt for all of the human reasons that we're wrong about a lot of things that they say about supernatural events. So that's what I want to clarify. Hopefully that answers your question, Dale. You can come back to it as the discussion begins. Right now, chomping at the bit, Mr. Attack.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. It's been a while. I think it's actually been exactly 4 months since I was last on. Always nice dialoguing with you guys. And yeah, let's jump right in. So the topic is about Satan. And there are a lot of views about who this person is, who this being is, that just are not true, that are like even within Christianity, that someone can say, okay, this is what I believe about Satan, and that's not necessarily true. So my purpose is here is like, it's to present the biblical view of who Satan is described to be. I don't want to speculate. I don't want to say, okay, I think this is the case, unless I have an actual warrant for that. So like in terms of who Satan is, what the Bible says is that first, he is a supernatural being. That means he's not just another human type naturalistic uh, product of evolution or something. He is supernatural. He is powerful than any human power. He is not local. He's called the deceiver of the whole world. That means he's not just constrained or restricted to one geographical area. He's a murderer. He's an accuser, and most commonly referred to as a slanderer. So like the title itself, Satan, and what we translate it to be the devil. The devil is the English translation of the Greek, which is diabolos, which that's where we get our word diabolical. So that word itself, diabolos, means slander, to accuse, someone who's just mean spirited. Like I can say, like, David, I saw you littering last night, and that may not be true or it may be false, but that's pretty much what he does. He's an accuser. He slanders all the time. Some of the things that this being does is that he goes around trying to deceive and devour Christians. So 1 Peter 5:8, he says he's like a roaring lion. He goes around looking for someone to devour, and that's referring to Christians. There's parts where he's said to possess people, like in the case of Judas. He entered Judas and caused him to go sell out Jesus. He's accusing Job in the first 2 chapters. He goes up and says, hey, God, the reason Job worships you is because you give him all this stuff. I bet if you take it all away, he becomes an unbeliever. So that's what Satan does. In heaven, he's accusing. On earth, he is deceiving. And another thing that I saw on the article that you wrote is that you said, okay, I would love to meet this person. And for me, like, that sort of read strange, because I don't understand, like, if someone is trying to deceive you, someone is trying to fleece you of your money, for example, they wouldn't want you to know that they're doing it. So if you have money in your bank account, and let's say I want to steal $1 million from you, like, what I'll do is perhaps I'll charge a little bit here, like 50 cents from your Netflix subscription, 50 cents from your I don't know, Amazon or something. And that way you're losing money. You don't know you're losing money, but I'm getting money and I'm deceiving you. And the best way I can do that is for you not to know that I'm doing it. So Satan, one of his primary roles is to lie and to deceive and to obscure and to obfuscate. And the verse that was quoted in the article, which is 2 Corinthians 4:4, says that the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ. So Satan is standing in the eyes of everyone in the planet, and he's blinding them. He says, I don't want you to see the glory of Christ. I don't want you to understand the gospel. I don't want you to think right thoughts about God, because Satan himself, probably more than everyone else on the planet, knows more theologically accurate thoughts than everyone else. So he wants people to believe wrong things about God so that they do not believe the glory of the gospel. I could say more, but I think that's a pretty good starting point to spring off of. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, very good. I had indicated that I had an opening statement in the run-up of the show, but I don't. I'll make a a closing statement at the end. So Russell, I'll let you close out the Christian openings.
Guys, I appreciate both of y'all's view. And yeah, I think both of y'all complimented each other on it. As far as shapes in the clouds, Dale, I think that's kind of hilarious that you would bring up Craig's little analogy there that he got from I guess in his studies of this. But I think a lot of Christians have they look for shapes in the clouds too, and I think that's because historically, over time, I think Milton kind of defined our idea, him and Dante, of this personage of Satan over time. But yeah, I mean, I think that's in Paradise Lost. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think we've personified it to a degree where we have this one image. But I think you guys do well into saying, yeah, there's in the Bible we can make a case, a probable case about who this Satan is, and that was pretty much where I would have went. You know, I think that in the Old Testament we see that uh, he is an accuser. He's an actual personage there. He is a person. Then we go through the New Testament and we see that is a lot more defined. Jesus talks about seeing him fall from like lightning from the heavens, and then we get a vision in Revelations chapter 12. So I would just confirm what both of you guys said there, and that's pretty much all I got for that. So
Okay. Let's see if we can make this a little bit more interesting then. I want to start actually with you, Russell, in your very last thought there about seeing Satan fall from heaven. Is there any part of you that is open to the idea that maybe that's a figurative, apocalyptic kind of illusion that should not be taken as literally as Christians take it? The same question would go out to all of you. This idea, and I want to say for the record, I love playing with the idea of Satan as this fallen angel who took a third of the angels with him. And I only do it because Christians insist that that's what it means. I don't actually think that's what it means at all. So anyone who hears me speak that way, just know that I am speaking as the Christians would have me speak. I think that there are good reasons not to think that. There's certainly a good case on the other side of it, but do you at least see the other case? Are you familiar with the other case at all?
I am familiar with it, but yeah, I would say that there's definitely apocalyptic imagery involved. Just like I think there could be a case for Isaiah and Ezekiel's messages to be, I guess, what they call a type and shadow of Satan, but ultimately the context reads that they're about people, they're not about Satan himself. So there is that essence there. So yes, I would say that there is that apocalyptic imagery there. So does that answer your question?
It does answer my question. Just briefly, Dale and Mac Attack, how would you answer it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Well, so the Russell was referring to some apocalyptic literature of illusions of Satan in the Bible, and I was just suggesting that there is a case to be made from other scholars, by the way, who would say, actually, that's not talking about Satan at all. The whole fall from heaven and taking a third of the angels and that sort of thing, that is not, in fact, a literal reference.
Yeah.
And the question is not whether you think it is or not, because obviously I think that the two of you think it is, but do you understand and at least recognize the case for it not being literal?
Yeah, I've read the arguments about why like it doesn't mean what it says, and like for instance, like where we get the word Lucifer is from Isaiah, and he's talking about the king of Tyre, and people apply that to Satan. And although like from the context itself, it looks like he's just talking about a king who was very prideful and put himself above the stars, so to speak. And yeah, that could be like a type, or like what David said, like it's a shadow of what Satan did pre-fall.
Dale?
Yeah, so I agree with both David and what Macatax said. So, Isaiah 14 is about, it's using hyperbolic language. It's talking about the king of Babylon. The Ezekiel passage is also talking about the king of Tyre there. Again, with hyperbolic language, whether there's an additional double meaning there where it's symbolic of Satan, that's fine. I'm not sure either way, but I think that my notion of there being a traditional understanding of something like an angelic fall comes from other verses that aren't talking about somebody else. So, for example, we have Luke 10:17 that says Jesus basically is talking about Satan falling like lightning to the earth from heaven, and I think that that's a reference to Satan's fall. There's also Jude 6 where it talks about God, the angels rebelling and sinning against God, and then he locks them up down into the bowels of the earth or into hell and that sort of thing. A similar verse is 1 John 3:8 that says, Satan sinned from the beginning. And with 1 Timothy 3:6, we get a little bit of a hint as to what that sin was. It was pride. So, elders and that are told not to be prideful, just like Satan was in terms of his sin. So I think that there are, outside of these Isaiah and Ezekiel passages, there are verses that hint at this angelic fall, and Satan is called the prince of all the demons and that sort of thing, and that he was an angel who sinned and fell with them. So that's how I would establish my understanding.
Okay, so I'm going to take it as given that everyone on the panel, besides me, believes that the Satan character is a literal character that was around in the beginning, that had some type of angelic beginning and had a fall from grace of some kind. So you can interrupt if you don't agree with that general characterization, but I want to progress that a step further and pick up where Dale left off there, which is the idea of Satan being a sinner, an evil person, an evildoer, a liar from the beginning. How does that work out with the fall aspect? If he was a liar from the beginning, then he couldn't have been much of an angel. So what did he fall from if this is what he was from the beginning?
So that's for me. So it doesn't.
It's for anyone. This is. I know that the four of you are there, but I don't want you to feel like you have to take the initiative every time, Dale.
Okay. So obviously, sin from the beginning implies a temporal thing. So it's not that he was created sinful. That's not what that verse is saying. It's saying he was created perfect. He was like every other angel. He was had his dominion and that sort of thing, and he rebelled against God or sinned against God through his own free will choice, as well as all the other angels that fell with him.
Well, it sounds like it happened pretty early, though. If it's saying from the beginning, I don't know what that means. If it doesn't mean the beginning.
Yeah, it would have to be, obviously it's pre the fall of human beings, right? Because he was the serpent or the snake in Genesis, or as it is at the very least symbolic of Satan himself and that sort of thing. So I think Satan was the one who tempted human beings. So it just comes down to, well, how do you interpret from beginning? I think that you're maybe going a little bit too literalistic, like, oh, as soon as Satan was created evil. That's not what the Bible's implying.
Well, but there are lots of beginnings, though. But if you're going to use a word like beginning, it has to have some kind of meaning. So, for instance, we can talk about the beginning of the universe as in a kind of a Big Bang thing. And that doesn't even mean the beginning of the cycle of universe. Maybe the beginning of this universal cycle, if you believe in a cyclical type of universe. And then you can talk about, well, the beginnings of humanity. Well, that's billions of years away from the beginning of the universe. So that's another beginning right there. You can talk about the beginning of modern humans, anatomically modern humans. That's another beginning. And so there can be lots of beginnings, but the beginnings have to, if you say in the beginning, you have to be referring to some beginning. And so if you're saying that Satan was a liar from the beginning, I'm trying to figure out what epoch that represents.
Yeah, I don't think that we can. The Bible doesn't specify, just to keep it straightforward. And it depends on how you interpret Genesis. Is it billions of years or 6,000 years old or something like that? My best guess is it's just saying from the beginning. We know for a fact scripturally that it was before the creation and fall of human beings, where we are in the in a fallen world and stuff like that. We can say absolutely it was before that, but as to whether it took place during the Planck time or during when the 400,000 years after the Big Bang or something like that, the Bible doesn't give us those details. So I can speculate and tell you what I believe, but I mean it's not biblically based. It's just me.
Sure. Well, I mean, I just find it an interesting idea that things could have been going along well for hundreds or thousands of billions or trillions of years before our beginning, and then Satan decides, you know what, I want to shake it up. If that wouldn't actually mean much then to say that he was a liar, a sinner from the beginning. So it is a little confusing, and this is some of the conversation that I have heard and had among Christians, and it's a little bit confusing to say, well, this is how he was from the beginning, but he was perfect to begin with. Well, if he was perfect from the begin with, there are questions like, how did he get this way in the first place? But if he was this way from the beginning, then one might wonder, well, maybe he had a purpose. God had a purpose for making him this way from the beginning. That's something that we might get into a little bit later, but I just wanted to put that out there as one of the points of confusion about Satan's origin. And if you hadn't brought up that passage, Dale, I would have. So it's an interesting thing that I know we're not going to get there with it, because the Bible is somewhat sparse on details about Satan, especially his origin story, and where it does speak, it's somewhat unclear. But I actually want to get to the titular question of the show, which is God of this world? ? So I want to go ahead and start at a different place here. I indicated earlier I'd like to get Magatak's views on this one. So Mac, you're more than familiar with the passage that I used to start off this week's blog post.
Yes.
And the idea that Satan as God of this world. And you're also familiar with the other passage that I didn't quote, but cite it, the temptation of Jesus, and the specific temptation where Satan offers Jesus the dominion of this world as if he had such a thing. So we've got a couple of places there. Dale in his run-up mentioned some sources, maybe some I don't know that it was Dale actually. I think it was you, Russell, who mentioned Dante and Milton. But before them, we had the Apocalypse of Moses, and also the Vedas of Adam and Eve that discuss Satan. So there are other biblical sources about Satan, and it's not quite fair to say, well, it's just these two guys who.
No,
who
I
gave
think
us this picture.
that they shaped what we have today. That's what all I meant. Kind of shaped what we have today, because obviously they were pulling from these other sources too, and I think that's just kind of where we're at now. That's just to clarify.
Sure. So back to you, Magatak. Satan seems to have some kind of dominion, and so I'm just gonna put the questions out there. What does it mean that Satan is a god of any kind, and more specifically that he is the god of this world?
All right. Thanks for the question. But before I answer it, like I'm looking at the chat here, and I don't know, it's kind of discouraging me a little bit because, like, when I said that I was gonna talk about the biblical view, I wasn't saying that my view is the only view. Like, I see a post from Darren saying, "Oh, you're saying every Christian has the correct view and everyone else is sin inflicted, and therefore it's like it reads very like sarcastic and mean spirited." And I'm like, that's not the purpose of these talks. It's not for me to like say like I have the right view and it's the only right view. Like this is the point of dialogue, and my other brothers on the show, like we've agreed so far. It's not like we're at each other's necks. Although I'm pretty sure like we disagree on some things. So like I just don't see how those sorts of like comments are helpful
Well,
unless you keep
you don't have
like
to
yeah.
feel compelled to respond to them. You can
All right, all right.
let them pass. You can respond to the ones you
I
want
guess
to,
we
but
can do it
I
on
think in
that.
this case, Darren did you a
Yeah.
favor
Yeah,
because
we can.
if
Yeah.
anyone
Just ignore
who's
the chat.
in it, well, I would say ignore it, but I think Darren did you a favor by you commenting on it in this way. If anyone listening to the show was following the run up to the show, because I put this blog up almost a week early, and they might interpret some of the things that you said the way that Darren interpreted it, and so it's good that you have a chance to clarify that.
Yeah.
So,
I think he's wrong, but like okay, I'll
I mean, I interpreted it that way.
well,
And
well
I'm not a stupid person, and I'm not especially mean
Well,
spirited
that's
all the time.
debatable. No, I'm
it's
just
not that
joking.
they're stupid. It's not
So
that anyone is stupid or anything. It's just that
right,
like
but
someone asks a Christian a question, right? And I'm like, okay, let's go to the Bible. And then you're like, oh, actually, there's other Christians who believe. Anyway, that's a
right,
topic for another
right,
time.
but I'm just saying you kind of opened the door to that kind of speculation earlier
Yeah,
because I felt the
like,
same way. Now I wasn't
like
going to bring it up in the show, but I felt the same way, and
I
I
think
think
it's
it's
just
good for you to clarify that and get your. This is why I want you on the show so that you can actually get your meaning out on the table so that people can hear you directly. You always do better that way. And so I just want to let you loose with these questions. What does it mean for
all right.
Satan to be a god of any kind, and more specifically, the god of this world?
All right, let's just jump right in. All right, so what the Bible says about who God is, the Most High God. So I'm going to quote a passage, Daniel 4:17. It says, "The Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he wills, and sets it over the lowliest of men." And I've got another passage, Psalm 103:19. It says, "The Lord has established his throne in heaven, and his kingdom rules over all." So there is no ambiguity about who rules everything. It's the Most High God. God rules the universe. So when God sets up a ruler, in this case, a supernatural being, Satan, to be the ruler of this age, this world, that means that Satan's authority does not come from him. It's derivative. That means God has allowed for Satan to be the ruler of this world, to go about doing what he's doing. He is
So
on a leash.
let me just clarify
Okay.
clarify this real quick so that I can follow along.
Okay.
It sounds like you are conflating God of this world and ruler of this world. So is that kind of how you read that? Would you say that this is an unfortunate translation?
No, I don't know. It's not an unfortunate translation because again, and this kind of ticks off a lot of people. Like if you study the original languages, it doesn't model, it doesn't like set up a problem where it's like, oh, it looks like the author is saying that there's another God who is also trying to, take the reign, so to speak. So like here's another passage that I was thinking of yesterday.
Okay, but before you go there,
Yeah.
because I just want to make sure I understand. I don't want to walk away from this not understanding you. So
Okay.
my interruption is really for clarification. Um, is Satan a god, as in a lesser god? Would you say that there are lesser gods?
Unless like
Um,
I have to know what you mean by God, because like the
well,
Bible
I have
says
to know what you mean by God.
all right, so
Actually,
let me define it. All right,
okay.
so like the passage I was gonna go to is Exodus 7:1, and it says like, here's God speaking to Moses, and he says, "See, I have made you like a god to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet." So when you read that, it sounds like God is telling Moses, like, I've made you God, but that's not what he means. The term used there, and this is where you have to get technical a little bit so that people don't get confused, it just means it's Elohim, and it means a disembodied spirit. So any disembodied spirit in the Bible is always, like, they call it a God. It just doesn't mean the Most High God. It doesn't mean like it doesn't mean worthy of worship. It just means that it's a disembodied spirit, it's supernatural, and that's the category that they've put
So
it
you're
in.
so you're saying that because the vocabulary is limited, right?
Yes,
That it's a figure of speech,
it's a
basically
sort of
saying
figure
it.
of speech, pretty
Yeah.
much what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So like when he says, have no other gods before me, he's not saying there are little other gods before me. You're saying that, it could be an idol, it could be, just what you conceive it as,
Whatever you conceive it as, and also like there's a spiritual aspect to it where it can be like a disembodied spirit is seen as God when it really isn't.
Okay,
So
let
it-
me
yeah.
ask about the disembodied spirit part, because that's new to me. So I'm thinking about outer body experiences, near death experiences. And when I hear Christians talk about that, they talk about it like a disembodied spirit. So let's just assume that they are right. I don't believe it for a moment, but let's just assume that they are right for the sake of this question. Would you say that the people having near-death disembodied experiences are gods in the way that Paul meant it here?
They're ontologically they're still human beings, but like
But
in
they're
terms of like,
disembodied,
they're disembodied. Yeah, sure.
so they would be
They could-
gods
a
in
like
this.
the way a person writing the Bible like Paul or Moses would describe them would be they would call them an Elohim or a Hotheos, but that wouldn't mean that they think that that person is God. Does that make sense?
Not really, because no one would say of a person experiencing an NDE that they're the god of this world, or that they're the god of the hospital, or they're the god of anything.
Well,
So God kind of has that implies something other than disembodied spirits, because the Bible has ways of talking about spirits without talking about gods.
actually, they call like disembodied spirits are called gods in Psalm 82. So again, this is a question of like language. All right. So Paul calls Satan the god of this world. Jesus actually calls him the ruler of this world. And the term itself could mean both. It could mean he is a ruler and he's also a god, as in he has dominion over the happenings of the world. And he's also called the prince of the air in Ephesians 2. So is he a prince? Is he a ruler? Is he a god? The answer to all of that is yes. Like all those are titles. It's just that the people living back then talked differently than we do, and they thought differently than they do. They had different categories. So our job is to figure out what they meant and how they understood it, not how I would understand it. So
Okay,
like,
so I think I'm circling in closer to what you mean, but I want to double back on this. So someone like Baal, would Baal have been an actual disembodied spirit, therefore, i.e., a god,
do you mean
or
like,
was there no Baal?
that's the thing? So like there are prohibitions, right, where God says do not like go out after evil spirits. So there's an acknowledgement that evil spirits exist. And then there's Baal, like some idols were just idols, they weren't really alive or anything, or they weren't
So you don't even think that Baal was a disembodied spirit?
I really don't know that much about if Baal was actually real or not.
Do you
I
think there
don't
were
understand
any of the
his
people
God.
that God's people worship? Do you think that they were disembodied spirits that they were legitimately worshiping and thought were gods?
Legitimately worshiping, like,
Yeah, they legitimately thought that they were real gods because they were legitimately disembodied spirits.
like Moloch. Yeah, sure. Like they would offer their children to Moloch. Yeah.
Yeah. So you
That's
believe that
that's-
Moloch would have been an actual disembodied spirit, right?
in terms of actual, I don't know because I didn't live there. But I can say what what it's described as is, yeah, evil spirits do exist.
Okay, so so you think that Satan is an actual literal disembodied spirit, right?
He's supernatural. Yeah.
Okay, so is he the only actual supernatural being in the Bible? I'm trying to get a sense of
No.
if he's the
Because
only one or if there were other ones with him, so that you could properly say in their language that there were many gods.
there were the, okay, there's Satan, right? And he's a disembodied. Ontologically, he's a fallen angel, and among those are other fallen angels, evil spirits, right? So they're all in the same category in terms of who they are. Like,
Okay,
it's
so
not going to say
in
that
their
they're different.
language, angels and demons would all be gods then, right? Because they're disembodied spirits.
They would be described as gods, yes.
Okay, all right, all right.
Is that
That's all I'm
fair?
getting. I'm not even trying to push back on whether I think that makes sense. I just
no,
want to
it
make
does
sure I
make sense.
understand. So
You understand.
all of the angels and demons would properly, in their vernacular that you're saying, be gods.
They would be called sons of God, because even if you read Job, it says that the sons of God were appearing. That's the designation that the people.
Okay, but we don't actually need sons of here. They would be gods in their
They will be,
vernacular.
yeah, they will be called gods.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'll let you go ahead with your explanation now. I understand.
Right.
I'm caught up.
I think I kind of got to the end where I was just saying that God is the Most High who rules the kingdom of men. That's Daniel 4:17. And then there's Psalm 103:19 that says God has established his throne and his kingdom rules over all. So anything that's ruling derives its authority from the Most High God.
Okay.
I think that's pretty clear.
That's
Yeah.
fine. So there's a kind of a second part of this question though, and I want you to start with that before turning it over to anyone else. So I appreciate you being a good sport here. So I understand what you mean by a God, the God of this world. That's a very specific title, a very specific realm or domain. Tell me about that.
So like in the context of 2 Corinthians 4, Paul is talking about how he and his companions are preaching the gospel and they're not using deception. And he says that to those people who, for instance, who are not understanding the gospel, or they're distorting it, or it's just not making sense to them, he's saying that the reason for that is that the God of this age, the prince of the power of the air, is blinding their minds through either how they're living their lives, what they're believing, what they've been taught, how they grew up, whatever. And that is stopping them from seeing the light of the gospel. And then he continues and says, like, when we preach, what happens is that God shows up and he turns on the lights and we believe in the gospel. That's pretty much what he's saying there.
Okay, that feels different than from what was being said in the Gospels.
How so?
Well, Jesus was dealing with someone who had dominion over the world.
Where specifically are you quoting from?
I'm just thinking about the
Matthew chapter
temptations.
4, right?
Yeah, Matthew 4, in the temptation where Satan offers Jesus something that either he has or he doesn't have, and Jesus plays along as if Satan in fact has what he offered.
Well, yeah, he does, because he's the ruler of the world. Like, he has money, he can.
Okay,
money,
but is he like the ruler of the world, as in God? Like, for instance, earlier we were talking about, once again, if I say you and it was Dale or Russell, just forgive me. We're saying how, like, Michael was the God / ruler of Israel.
That was Dale, yeah.
Okay, and Gabriel was the ruler of someone else, but it sounds like Satan also had a rule or a domain that was broader than theirs.
Because
his was the world, and they're like governors of tribal people.
Like, first I'll say, like, I don't know, like, where Dale, I've never heard that before, but I'll say this, like, in terms of Satan's dominion of this world, that has to do with, like, how people live their lives as children of Adam, children of fallen sinners. Like, Satan's dominion over the world carries over into what we as human beings desire: jobs, careers, pleasures, money, things that are to keep us away from God.
So that's kind of figurative language for you. Let me just jump over to Dale real quick. I know that you've got something there, Russell. Dale, so you understood that I think it was Isaiah passage as talking about these various archangels with actual dominion, rulership, governorship over areas, like knights, in an empirical kind of sense. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. So did you also envision Satan as being one of those people who had dominion, or is talk of his dominion kind of, as McAtack is saying, that's all figurative? He doesn't actually have a domain.
Wait. No. I didn't say that. I did not say that he does not have a domain. I said that he does, but like in the way that it manifests itself is through like.
Well, right. That's
blindness.
right. That's kind of figurative language. And what Dale is describing is literal language. Gabriel, Michael having literal domain. They've been knighted as lords of these regions.
I don't think Dale believes that, but okay. All right.
Well, he just said so. So Dale, go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead, Dale.
All right. So yeah, I do take those verses to be saying, yeah, God has delegated authority to angels to be the princes of certain regions and that sort of thing. So I was sort of speculating that one thing that some Christians have interpreted is, well, they'll say, well, Satan, pre his angelic fall, maybe his domain was the world, or the universe or something like that. But I think that most Christians like McAtack, and including myself, would lean against that, because obviously God is the sovereign ruler of all of creation. That's part of the essence of what it means to be divine. It's part of what makes him worthy of worship. I do think that God can delegate his authority to certain intermediary figures. That's proven historically and biblically as well. But I sort of think that human beings occupy that. As image bearers of God's, we are the stewards of the earth. God has delegated that authority to us. But yeah, I was just mentioning that there are other Christians that say, well, maybe Lucifer had that role originally, and after he fell, then it was delegated to humans or something like that. So I was just offering that as sort of a possible interpretation. It's not necessarily something that I believe is the case with him. But
all right, so let's run with that for just 1 mile more, Dale, if you please. So when Satan is offering Jesus domains, or the rule of the world, if you will, did Satan have it to offer or not? I mean, did he have it in the same way that Michael, had regions? Did Satan still have some power to give or not? Because it sounds like he did.
For sure. Yeah. I take, like, in terms of offering that to Jesus, absolutely. He is literally the ruler of the world, post the fall and that sort of thing. Absolutely. But I think the biblical view is that it's not so much God delegated it to him. I see it more as like a usurped authority. He's perverted God's order. And
who did he usurp it from?
God.
How?
Well, once he fell and sin, once the fall happened and sin entered into the world, creation itself was put into bondage to Satan. So he has control through his demonic power and satanic powers to control the world, and that's why.
Okay, so I just, once again, I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to keep up, because it's I don't take notes, and it's easy to get lost in this. So you believe it's possible that Satan may have had some actual domain, maybe the number 2 in heaven, and maybe he was going to be governor of the world for some bit, and so it's possible that he had some actual delegated power, and then he falls from heaven, but he still kind of has the ability to exercise some power here. And whatever he did to cause the fall on earth, it wrestled away the power from God. And so he legitimately has a rulership over this earth that he can bargain with Jesus.
Yes, and obviously all this is taking place within the overall providential will of God, right? God is obviously permitting this usurpation to happen for his own divine purposes. It's not like Satan was literally stronger than God and took it against God's will or something like that.
Oh,
Yeah, we're not dualists, David.
okay, we're gonna get there in the last section here, but I just want to make sure I understand all of the run up. So, Russell, let me bring you back in the conversation. So Satan has some power, some authority that he can bargain with God. What exactly was he bargaining off to God? How, or to Jesus? Excuse me. How would that have looked if Jesus had said, "Yeah, that's a good deal. I'll take it"? What I mean,
Well,
what
you went
what
to-
exactly would he have been handing over that Jesus did not have?
Well, I think that he would have. Wow, that's a good one. I think that he would have had some sort of influence over a certain amount of time until God took it back. And I think it could have shaken up the heavens. I have no idea. I mean, that's a catastrophe. I don't think it was ever going to happen. So I don't think that it was even a possibility for
Right,
Jesus
but for us to understand
come
the
to that.
temptation,
But you know,
right, we
what
have to
I was-
understand what the temptation was. And I'll
Oh,
be
yeah,
honest
well,
with you, I never understood what the temptation even was.
well,
He
I think
seems
the
to be offering
temptation-
something either Jesus had it and it wasn't a temptation, or Jesus didn't have it and he could have potentially gotten it. And then I'm trying to
Yeah,
understand, well,
okay,
what is the
okay, I
it he
see
could
where
have
you're
gotten?
I hope I see where you're going with it. Um, yeah, I think that Satan, the appeal to Satan's temptation there was Christ having or being able to forego the cross and not have to go through all that pain and suffering and that wrath being poured out upon him. So that's what I think the appeal was in the temptation. It was definitely appealing to Christ's human nature at that point, because Christ did take on the human nature as well. But yeah, as far as Christ actually failing in that, I don't think there was even a chance for him to actually fail. But I do see the temptation of there being that human side where he'd have to endure all that, and it would have just been given to him versus going God's route. And I think that's the moral of the temptation, is that it didn't matter what Satan tried to do, that Jesus was going to take God's route over Satan's route every time. And even if that meant dying for it. And that's a lesson to us that we are, we should be going God's route regardless of what will happen to us here. So
Sure.
that's kind of like the way I see that. Did that answer your question? As far as Satan having, hold on, let me finish. I thought I was finished, but something else popped in. I
Sure.
think that also the idea that Satan had all this in the realm of us giving him that political authority at the fall, I think that he did have dominion and influence, but I also see where he could have been lying about that influence, because it does state that he's a liar. So could he have had it? Maybe. Could he have not had it? Maybe not. I don't know for sure, because he's a liar. I can't trust anything that he says. But I mean, if he offers it up and Jesus says no, I think the moral of the story then kind of puts it back on, yeah, Jesus was willing to go God's route no matter what Satan could have offered him or not offered him.
Sure. Well, if I recall correctly, and I can't be bothered to look it up right now, the nature of the temptation was just bow down to me and it's yours. So I take you up to this high place. These are all of the places that I control. I control it all. I am ruler of it all. I am, if you will, if you'll allow me to put words in his mouth, God of this world. Just borrow them from Paul. And what he told Jesus they had to do to get it was just bow down and worship me. That's something that a God would say. Right? I mean, it kind of fits in with this idea, Mac, that Satan viewed himself as at least a God that could be worshipped.
Yes, because like every single idol out there could turn into like something that you worship. And I agree with what David Russell said in saying that like Satan was appealing to Jesus' human nature, because there are lots of passages as you keep reading the Gospels where people were trying to make Jesus king by force, and Jesus retreats because he's like, I don't want to be king. That's not why I'm here. So Jesus just flees that temptation to be made king over a whole subsection of people. So Satan shows up and says, you know, you don't have to do all that cross stuff. You can just bow down and you can get the kingdoms of the world right now. You don't have to go through all that. And Jesus resists him. And the truth is, yeah, Satan does have dominion over some kingdoms of the world, like all the kingdoms of the world. And the temptation there is in saying that, okay, I'm the supreme God now, bow down before me. Actually, Jesus replies and says, you are not the one that rules over everything. The Lord does. So that's who you're supposed to worship. You're not supposed to worship a derivative authority like Satan.
Right, but whether he's derivative or whether he is simply a god, a minor god, a demigod, he's still some kind of god. That it seems to me. And once again, if you, I could poll
David, that's an authority only in the amount that he's given. I mean, no Christian would ever say that a finite being actually has godhood. I mean, that would go against our definition. Correct, Dale? I mean, maybe Dale can answer this too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to just say, so I think MacAttack did a great job on answering this notion of gods and how that relates to pagan deities and idols and that sort of thing. So,
well, actually, he said that it's any disembodied spirit. So angels and demons would have also been considered gods.
They would be called gods, but they
okay.
Be
so they would have been gods in Paul's vernacular.
Yes,
and it would have been proper then to say that the angels and demons are gods.
In the vernacular, yes, yeah. But
in a certain sense, I mean, in Psalms 88, Jesus refers to people as gods too. So the judges were supposedly gods too, as far as their authority and the.
Well, it's a little bit different to say in this one small instance, you're going to have a power like a god over this one person. And another thing to say, you are a god. Okay, those are different. Those are different things.
You are gods. He says you are gods. I mean, it's a figure of speech. I mean, you have to grant that to. You have to like understand what they're saying in that time in their vernacular. I mean, Paul calls him a god and then calls him the prince of the air. So what is it? Is he a prince or is he a god? You have to look at the figure of speech and the way it's being used.
Right, but from my point, I don't care whether you say he's the god, whether he's the ultimate god. You have to at least acknowledge he's a god in their understanding of God.
No,
in their understanding of gods.
It's like when there's sometimes.
What do you mean? No,
I tell them I'm about to explain it to you if you shut your mouth. No, I'm just joking.
I'm going with what I've been told this whole time.
I know you are.
Okay,
I'm teasing you, by the way. You know me, I like to break it up a little bit, break the ice. But
that was funny. Go ahead.
I often call some of my friends, one of my friends, he loved his car so much. I said, that's your God, man, and it's just a figure of speech. I'm not using it in technical, like meaning, okay, now this is what I really think. I really think that this car has some supernatural properties. No, I just think it's a heavy influencer on the way he acts and so forth. So, I mean, that's kind of the way I see it. And I most Christians, I think, do see it that way.
But that's not what was said, though, earlier in the show. It's disembodied. No, it wasn't. It's disembodied spirit. And that someone like Molech, for instance, was Molech, an actual guy with actual power, who's an actual spirit, and they would have considered him an actual God. It doesn't matter whether you say they would have considered him equal to Yahweh. That's a different question. But they would not have been wrong to say he was a god, and you would be wrong to say there are no other gods.
David, you're misunderstanding like what David and I are saying, because we're saying that the way that disembodied spirits were described in the Old Testament in Hebrew was Elohim, and that means like just a disembodied spirit. So you can substitute that term into our English and say that's a god. Okay, so an evil spirit, a demon, could be referred to by a person living in that time as a god. But that designation obviously gets muddled because we live in a culture where God means specifically one thing. So it's not that they thought for sure that any evil spirit was God. They just called it a god because it was a disembodied spirit.
Well, they also worshipped it. They also worshipped lots of gods, and so they thought that they were beings to be worshipped. Unlike a car, which you might call an idol, but you wouldn't call a god. Dale, go ahead and you can have the last word on here. We got a lot more to cover.
Okay. Yeah, I've been trying to say something. I don't even know where it's going to fit in, but okay. So the first thing, yeah. So I like what David Russell and Mac Attack have already said. I think they've said it mostly correctly in terms of this term gods or Elohim, lords, and that sort of thing. It's a figure of speech in ancient Hebrew. So to answer your question, there are some skeptics have pointed out contradictions between the way Isaiah views pagan idols or gods and other passages. So I don't think there is a contradiction there. So what is happening is Isaiah's right. These pagan idols, there is no god Baal. There is no being, Marduk or Zeus or something like that. But these idols are made up or invented. They're just carvings of stone, and demonic spirits impersonate these gods and use it for satanic ends and stuff like that. So I think that's what's happening. That's how we reconcile any texts that skeptics want to say are a contradiction between.
Where do you get that from? That feels like headcanon. I don't see how.
No, he gets it from Isaiah. I'll find the reference for you right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
appreciate
you can also
that.
see it in Jeremiah 10 as well, where he's talking about the people carving into idols and they really can't do nothing. It's all throughout scripture.
Right, but so sure but you can
just
say that about. I'm sorry, you can say that about God too, because Catholics use idols to represent gods. It doesn't mean the idol is a god. So
Yeah,
I don't. That
That's what
doesn't.
we're saying. The idol
but
isn't a god. That's what we're
The
saying.
idol isn't a god, but the god behind the idol is a god. So it doesn't. That is not. That is not a refutation of the idea that these beings were real.
So this is what this is the second part. Just let me get this out, and then I'll
Sure.
shut up.
Go ahead.
Talk as long as you want. But so remember,
I mean, it's a lot of contradictory stuff, and I'm trying to keep it all together.
Let me help.
So okay, go ahead.
Let me help you with my take and see if that works. So we've discussed this when we did the show on the Trinity, specifically the Old and New Testament data. So remember, there's two ways to look at this, right? So the first one is with respect to what is God. So this is the philosophical perspective. So I'm going to say with these pagan idols, they are not by essence God. They don't have the divine nature. So that's what they lack. That's why they're not, even though we're using the word gods, no Jew, no Bible reader in history would say, well, these demonic entities impersonating gods have the divine nature. No, they're of a demonic nature or something like that. I might have a slight disagreement with Mac Attack based on the nature of disembodied spirits alone constituting an angelic essence or a demon essence. I think more to it is needed, just because I define the human essence as a person, an unembodied person that is embodied in a physical body governed by the human genome. That's the essence of being a human being, my definition of it, and stuff like that. So there's a slight difference there that'll have implications. But going back, okay, forget about the what. This is headcanon. This is modern philosophy by saying, okay, it lacks the divine nature. No Jew would have talked this way. They approached it, the essence of God, through who is God. And this relates to Richard Bauckham's divine identity theory, right? So God has unique attributes by essence. He is the only creator and sustainer of everything that exists. And number two, he alone is the proper sovereign ruler and authority over everything in creation. No pagan entity or quote unquote God had those attributes. And that's how Jews of the Second Temple period would have differentiated, if a pagan came up to them and said, well, what's so special about your God compared to ours? That's what they would have said, to say our God is unique. He is the one true only God. Your pagan entities are filth, throw them in the garbage.
Okay, right. And they would have said that all the way up until the time that they started bowing down and worshiping these other gods. So Yeah, I mean, that may be an idea that some of them had at some time, but they were always going off worshiping other gods. And so I don't really think it holds that was their persistent idea of who God was.
But that was them sinning, right? Like
Okay,
you're
you can say that it's sinning, but it's what it is it showing in practice what they thought gods were. Because if what you're saying is true, one could never have room to worship another god. I could never worship a brick thinking it was a god. I simply couldn't do it. I know a brick to be a brick. They did not know the thing that you were saying that they knew, because they could go off and worship other gods.
No, they
But
would go off and worship what they thought were other gods, and they would sin. But there's always a remnant that corrected them. I mean, that's
Okay,
why
but once
we had the
again, though,
prophets in the first place.
Dale's idea is that they only had one who as a god, and they
Yeah, they
had his
did.
attribute. They had his
They did.
attributes. Well, they did until they didn't.
No,
And they
a remnant
constantly
always
didn't.
had it. No, and a remnant always had it. A remnant
Okay.
always had it. That's why.
So this is a no true
Well,
Scotsman
listen,
argument for the for the
here it is. I
remnant.
mean, you see the faithful that the prophets they actually put them up. I think it was the Rechabites that he said were loyal, and you see the
Right.
the Burks.
I understand that though.
So,
I understand that though, David. But what all that's saying is there was a group of people who stuck with the right guy.
Yeah,
But you're saying,
idea.
but what Dale is saying is definitionally, they couldn't have thought of these other things as gods. And I am saying historically, if you're taking the Old Testament historically, they did think of these other guys as gods.
Some
Yeah.
of them,
All of the
probably,
time.
yeah.
Some of
Some
them
of
did.
them.
Like, okay, like the
It's
reference
obviously a
that
division. Oh,
that
go ahead,
Dale
Mac.
did.
Sorry.
Oh no, sorry. Like Dale was referencing Isaiah 44, where Isaiah goes on this rant and says, like, you people are worshiping idols. You take the wood and then you carve it up and you make it into an idol, and then use the same wood to cook up a meal, and then you use it for whatever. And he's just saying that the whole idea of idol worship is ludicrous because you're pretty much worshiping a brick. But then there's also like another aspect to it where it's like evil spirits were all over the place, and people would have been tempted to worship like an evil spirit, like that demanded you to sacrifice your child, something like that.
Okay, so I'm gonna let it drop there and leave it to the commentariat. And I'm gonna move on to Satan's origin story. I'm gonna move through this very quickly because I think some of this was covered here. Sorry about the cutoff. I just want to get through these. I'll let you finish your thought in a minute, Mac, because you can just tack it on to this next section here. So I'll give you first bite of the apple. I want to get to the after show, though, while I still have energy, because I think that there may be some interesting tie-in to this, and I know that Dale put in some time, and he may have some things to say about that. So just a lot to cover. So the origin story kind of feeds into this. I guess we could have started with the origin story, but I think it was more interesting to start this way. Satan. Just going with a kind of a typical origin story, I would say first and foremost, with my Christian hat on, we don't know jack about Satan's origin story, but I think that the Christians are kind of wrong about the origin story that's kind of headcanoned into place. But let's just assume for a moment that it is as a lot of Christians like to think it is. Satan, he's a good guy, maybe number 2 in heaven, most beautiful, most beloved, most privileged, what have you. But angels being free will creatures, Satan wanted more. He wanted more. So one of the things that Sarah often brings up, and it's something that I have wondered for a long time, even as a Christian, is if Satan was as close to God as any creature could be, not just physically, but close in every way, beloved, trusted. He is experiencing the greatest heavenly heaven that anyone could imagine. How could one experiencing that, spending their days in the bosom of God, think, this isn't enough? Just philosophically speaking, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Go ahead and tear into it, anybody who wants to.
All right, so I get first dibs. Oh yeah,
That's right,
question-
Mac. I'm sorry. I told you you got first dibs, and you can finish your thought as you bleed into this question. So,
All right, sure. Finishing my thought, Isaiah 44 was where Dale was talking about, and I think we actually do agree on it. It's just maybe we would describe it differently on that. Yeah. So, all right, to the question, why would Satan, who lived in heaven perfectly, rebel against God? That's $1 million question. That it doesn't, like, there is no chapter or verse that I can take you to and say, okay, this is the exact reason why. But like, I feel like there is precedence to read through all of Scripture and see how people, like, for instance, Adam and Eve could live in a perfect paradise and still decide to rebel.
I would disagree. It wasn't a perfect paradise. It had temptations in it, and I'm assuming that heaven had no temptations in
It
it.
had no temptations, but what I'm saying is that we can glean over passages in the Bible and try and figure out how can someone who lived perfectly in heaven rebel or decide to do something that's contrary to.
Well, what I'm telling you is
will.
that I couldn't do it, and Sarah can't do it, and a lot of
Well,
current Christians and former Christians can't do it.
That's kind of what I'm trying to do. Can I keep going, please?
Right. But I just the comparisons you're making are an imperfect world with temptations, and of course, I can imagine how any human can, fall or do the wrong thing. But that's not the situation that Satan was in, and so philosophically speaking,
I'm still like setting the table to answer the question.
all right,
And
I'm gonna mute my mic, so the next
and then-
time I interrupt, nobody will hear it.
I'll be like, okay, you can chime in. All right, so Satan is in heaven, everything is perfect, and he rebels. Does any Christian know for sure why Satan sinned? The answer to that is no. It's not. We're not told how. We're not told what he decided in his mind. Like, okay, I want that authority over there or something like that. Specifically, all we know is that he rebelled, and so from all of Scripture, we know that God allowed for that to happen, and God used that for his purposes. It wasn't a case of Satan catching God by surprise. And why did Satan do it? Well, that's the thing that he's going to have to answer for on the judgment. He's going to say, that's the specific reason I wanted to. And I don't know what the question exactly aims to get at, but what I see from the Bible is that when someone sins or someone goes contrary to God, what they're doing is they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're sabotaging themselves, which is what Satan did when he took a third of the angels and decided to rebel, because that got him condemned. It got him cast out of heaven. And now he roams around deceiving and accusing. And that's what he's doing for a very long time. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's the best I can say. That's the best I can offer right now.
Dale, you and I have had this conversation a little bit, and we're not going to have it a lot today, but I just want to throw you in there. Do you at least understand the nature of the question?
Yeah, I do. So
Because it's philosophical as much as anything else. I know, I'm well aware the Bible doesn't give us any details about this origin story. I just said that. But what the problem is, having a hard time just even conjuring a scenario where it would make sense.
Well, I think so. Just just to add to what Mac Attack just said, I think the Bible does give us in 1 Timothy 3:6 one extra additional detail as to what that sin was that Satan did to rebel against God, and it was pride. Out of pride, Satan sinned and was therefore condemned against God. Now, in terms of the philosophical question, it's the same philosophical question we have with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden as well. You're in perfection. You were created good by God and morally ideal and everything like that. How could you freely choose to sin in such a scenario? And I think that the only answer that we can have is what philosophers call acrasia, otherwise known as weakness of the will. And that's what it was. So I take a philosopher, Dr. Tamara Shapiro. I did a show based on my essay in the philosophy of mind class on acrasia, what it is, how it works, how weakness of the will can work for people to sin when they're created good, as God defines good and that sort of thing. So it's basically based on orientation. So we are oriented toward God when we're created perfect. Satan was oriented. Lucifer's not his proper name, but Satan was oriented towards God and goodness and moral goodness and everything like that. But it takes willpower, it takes effort to maintain that orientation when we're faced with certain temptations or something like that. And certain temptations are just an inherent necessary part of being a free will creature. And sometimes, so with Satan, when he was faced with this temptation, he freely chose to let go of what Tamar Shapiro calls the burden of freedom, to keeping himself oriented towards God and saying, nope, I'm not going to be tempted or given to that temptation. He let go, and that oriented his will towards this prideful sin, whatever it was, that this act of rebellion against God, and then he gave in and chose to do the sin. And that's the same answer I give with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Why did they choose to sin against God or eat the fruit or whatever it was? A weakness of the will. So that's my
Okay,
answer.
2 down, 1 to go. You both misunderstand the philosophical question, because you keep talking about Adam and Eve and temptation. It's not the same thing. There was a specific temptation in quote unquote paradise. Eden was never paradise. Eden was never paradise. It had an evil creature in it when they got there. It had a death tree that looked beautiful in the middle of the garden. It was not paradise. Now, the only way the connection would be made is if you're saying, well, heaven was like that too. It had its own version of an evil temptation. It had its own version of some things that would go bad. And I am saying that from my Christian perspective, when I was a Christian, heaven wasn't like that at all. It would not have had any thing pushing you toward doing something bad.
So that's why we disagree. So that's where we disagree. That's logically impossible. Now it could be that there was no external temptations or influences up in heaven, like there was with Satan or something like that in the Garden of Eden. But there are inherently when you're a free libertarian free will creature, there are inherent temptations that you will be privy to. It is impossible for there not to be any temptations, at least of the internal variety. So we would disagree fundamentally on that. It is the same as Adam and Eve.
Okay, then I would say then what you're saying is my philosophical dilemma is not a dilemma because heaven's not perfect. So do you see post Earth heaven with humans in it being able to fall? Or do you see that as a different kind of heaven than it was before humans? Because if you could fall then, and the number 2 guy, if it wasn't enough for him, then how's it going to be enough for us?
Right. Okay. So I have 2 answers for this, and in my research on the nature of angels, I've been kind of possibly being open to a different view. So this is going to get so yeah, you understand with the pre-fall thing, the main difference between Adam and Eve and Satan is that it's a difference between internal versus external temptations. That's the only difference, but it's impossible for there not to be this temptation or for crazy. If you have free will creatures, that's necessarily entailed. So does that happen in the post judgment day thing? And my answer to this was always, yeah, it's exactly the same. It's logically possible, strictly logically possible for people to sin in heaven after they're saved and that sort of thing. But it's just factually the case that after going through this, we will never make that choice again. And the Bible's giving us that descriptive prophecy that once we're saved, we will never choose to sin again like Adam and Eve did. But in my research for this show, I'm a little bit more open to the fact. So number 1, the atonement was only for humans. It was not for demons and angels, and that sort of thing. So I disagree with, I think it was Origen who said that. So the Bible does seem to be saying that the angels that fell, they're locked into their evilness. They can't be redeemed and that sort of thing. So there's no point in Jesus dying for them. Same with the angels that remained in heaven. They're locked in with sealed. Their souls are sealed in this state that they did.
Well,
That
what? Go back.
Mhm.
You're saying that the angels can't fall now.
Yes, I think
Well,
that.
then what's the different? What happened that the number two guy could fall and third of them fell with him, but they can't fall now? Where's that come from?
So this is an understanding Catholics have, for example, right? So
You're not a
you have
Catholic.
to, I know, but I'm telling you, the reason I'm more open to this possibility than I was before I researched for this show is based on the biblical data that who did Jesus die for? It was for human beings. It was not for demons, right? Well, why wouldn't he? If Satan and demons could be redeemed, why wouldn't he die for them? So there's two interpretations you can give. If you want to give that we maintain our libertarian free will throughout all eternity, then you can say, well, Jesus didn't die for the demons because even though they maintain their libertarian free will, he knows that none of them are going to choose to be saved, so he just excludes them. You could use that. Or you can give the explanation that the Catholics did. After all the angels made their free will choice, all of them had libertarian free will, the ones that stayed in heaven and the ones that fell. After that, their souls were crystallized or sealed in the state that they freely chose. And if that's the case, then that could imply that it'll be the same for humans. After Judgment Day, we're sealed in our states. So I'm kind of not sure what the Bible teaches on that front.
Okay, well, let me just throw in a smidgen of theology to counter that. I wasn't planning on going here, but it's hard not to get drawn in these theological absurd debates. So there's this one ridiculously short and cryptic passage where Paul tells the Corinthians, I want to say 2 Corinthians 6, somewhere in there, in making a completely other point. He says, don't you know you will judge the angels? This has always been a head scratcher. So this is a thing that will happen in the future. He was talking to the Corinthians about being able to be judges over their own matters, and not going off to human courts and things like that. You should be able to judge these little disputes among yourselves. Don't you know you're going to judge the angels? That's kind of the context there. And so it strikes me that it is extremely not only possible, but inevitable that the remaining angels also sin. Because if they couldn't, we would have nothing to judge. There would be nothing ever to judge about the angels.
Well, it's in this context, the word for judge is the Greek word krino, right? So that just means to rule or govern over, and that makes sense. We're not judging them based on their sin, but we're given rulership or governorship.
In the context that Paul was saying, he was talking about being able to judge, not rule, but to actually judge the way we understand judge disputes among each other.
No.
And he says, don't you know you will judge the angels? And I don't understand the context switch that you're suggesting there. The passage, you can look up the passage. I'm not going to go to it now. Someone can put it in the comments.
I've got it up on my screen as we speak.
Okay.
I'm getting this from. So
okay, you can
to rule or govern over is what he's talking about.
Okay, you're going to read the passage or the Cliff Notes from Strong's?
What are you asking me? What?
Yeah, are you interested in what the passage actually says, or are you just interested in the Cliff Notes from Strong's? Because I didn't ask for the Cliff Notes. I'm telling you what the context of the passage was. Christians are always crying context. So I gave you some context of the passage there. If I'm wrong about that context, you can correct me on that, but you haven't done that. The context was they were having trouble dealing with squabbles and disputes among themselves, and Paul was chiding them for that. and throws in, "Don't you know you will judge the angels?"
All right, I can read it, and then
Okay.
we can work through it.
I mean,
First
look,
Corinthians-
that's fine. You can read it. It's not a huge point. It's not something that should have even come to dispute. But go ahead, Mac.
like so that we can get the context right and we can all be happy in the end. All right. 1 Corinthians 6. When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? All right. So there's the context. He's saying, and I agree with you there, David, that he's saying, okay, some of you are kind of taking each other quickly to like the magistrates to judge, like sending each other to prison, stuff like that. And he's saying that, okay, you have to have good discernment. You have to have Christian discernment, because in the age to come, you also will have like to have, you also need to have that same exact competence in the age to come when it comes to judging angels. So what Dale said there is also right. Like in terms of judging doesn't necessarily mean sinning. Like I can have my kids show
Well, it
up
does mean settling disputes, right?
selling disputes, right? But like selling disputes doesn't necessarily mean that there's someone that is sinning, or like
Well,
the
what
judge, the
possible
angel is there.
dispute can there be in paradise where people's souls are locked into eternal good?
There could be misunderstanding. Do you think that misunderstanding is sinning? Like
I
you can
think
say
I think
something,
misunderstanding would be impossible in a place where you are locked into a state of love and peace and harmony. Now I'm trying to figure out what the dispute would be. You know, he stole my parking spot. You know, that's the because those are the kind of disputes we have here. And in these cases, yeah, there's a problem. Somebody is wrong. And what the hell do you care about your parking spot that much for anyway? Just park in another one. We would have that dispute because we are feeble. But I don't understand how you could have that dispute in heaven if Dale's version of the story is correct and that there is no more acrasia somehow. And so I was simply providing that as a counter to his theory.
And just to clarify, I offered two theories, right? So like, even though it could just be a fact of the matter that we maintain our libertarian free will and we just will never give in to a crazy again, or there's this, you could go with this locked in option or this ceiling of your nature or
Right,
whatever.
but angels will still be arguing over parking spots, and it is going to be such an argument that we humans, we're going to have to fix it.
Well, it could be that there's intellect. We're going to continue to grow throughout eternity and learn more and more facts. Maybe there could be some disputes over facts as we're investigating or learning and stuff like that. And God delegates to us.
All disputes have the potential to turn into uh, vitriol and anger and fighting and war. That's the nature of disputes if they go unchecked.
not in heaven, because
Well,
like
okay, then why do we need to judge them then? If
Because, like-
there's nothing, no harm, no foul.
'cause
You know,
What
I
I
think
feel-
Beastie Boys was the best rap group. No, I think Vanilla Ice. If that's the only thing they're arguing about, why are we judging the angels, for Pete's sake? If there's no possibility for bad things happening.
so here's the thing, like in terms of, I'm sorry, Dale, you want to go first?
Okay, I'll just say quickly, yeah, because we're seeking perfection, we're becoming more and more like God, so we want to know the truth of every single fact and stuff like that. We don't want someone to be in error in heaven. But yeah, go ahead, Mac.
Yeah, like I was saying, like I hear this objection all the time from atheists and skeptics who say like, oh, heaven's just going to be boring. They're just going to be there singing all day and doing nothing, and that sounds boring to me, and I would rather have a lobotomy. And like
Clearly, we're going to be breaking up fist fights at the bar.
Then you read First Corinthians. Well, that's not. And then you read 1 Corinthians 6, which introduce an aspect of an activity in heaven that's going to involve angels and humans presiding over angels. And it's like, oh, that creates problems. But like, it's like you have to like take that as part of the greater context of as that heaven will be perfect. Saints will be in a state of perfection, and there'll be angels there, and there is going to be like a hierarchy of like these believers and there's angels, and you're judging between angels. What is that going to look like? I don't know. I don't think there's anyone who actually knows. But like, I don't think that necessarily means that there's going to be wars in heaven between angels and they're like punching and kicking each other. Like, what I think personally, and I'm not married to this idea, I think that the experience that humans have, redeemed believers have, like in terms of perseverance and knowing what it's like to be a Christian, and to go through life and stuff like that, and angels in heaven perhaps have a different experience. And I think that we, as believers who have been redeemed and know experientially what it's like to live in a world like this, we are going to be able to like impart that knowledge to angels who have not lived in a fallen world.
Why do
where
they need that knowledge? I mean,
why
honestly,
wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? So that's the thing. Why wouldn't they need that knowledge?
they've
So
been
that's
presiding. What I don't understand that they've been
why you're talking about
presiding
the
over us for all this time, and they've been in heaven, but
but we're talking about
somehow
experiential knowledge here. They're not the angels in heaven don't know what it's like
we're
to
gonna
like
set them straight.
not that's the thing. Okay, so don't like use this language where it's like, oh, we're gonna set them straight, like, or implying that it's gonna be the same as it is here on
Well,
earth.
even if you use Dale's language of we're going to rule them, oh, we're qualified to do that.
That's not applying to people who have not been saved. That's for
These
believers.
guys are dumb as stumps. If they're going to be ruled by anybody like me, I feel sorry for your heaven. It's going to come down in less than 10 minutes.
Like David, like you're making category errors. This passage is for believers. It's not saying that anyone is just gonna go up there and start telling angels what to do, like, oh, clean up my house or my mess, or do this or do that. Like, it's gonna, like, I don't know exactly what this verse means specifically in terms of how it's gonna play out. But what I'm saying is that in terms of like imparting knowledge to angels, like when we get to heaven, it's not just gonna be one activity like how atheists say it's gonna be. It's gonna be boring or anything. It's gonna involve more things about reality itself that God has prepared that no
Right.
mind right now can conceive of.
Look, it's obviously always been fairly interesting up there because just look at what a mess of it is here. Look, point number 3. Let's get there. I spent way more time on this than I wanted to. Thanks, guys. Russell, I'm going to start with you on this one. You are, by the way, you're standing strong, MagTac. Good for you. It gets harder from here, I think. Russell, you had nothing to say during that section, which is fine.
Yeah, I had to leave a couple times. So
No problem. You've saved up all of your juice for this question. It'll be easy, super easy. What is Satan's power?
Well, deception. He's I think that's one. Obviously,
deception. Is that a power? Do I have the power of deception?
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, you deceive
Okay,
me a
so
lot.
how is it a power?
Rerouted questions.
Well, right. No, I mean, but
let's define.
that just seems like a thing that you
power.
can do, right? I'm trying to. I'm thinking in terms of a supernatural power.
Anything, if you want to. Okay, so thank you for the clarification there.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, I don't really know that from what I can gather from Scripture. He obviously took Jesus to, I don't know if it was an illusion or not, but took him up to the pinnacle of the temple and said, hey, let's jump. He showed him the kingdoms of the world. I don't know how that was possible or what he did there, what type of power that takes to manifest, whether it was illusion or not. So yeah, I'm kind of split on the issue of how much power he actually does, if it's all just stuff that God allows him to do or not. I don't know fully. But yeah, I don't think he has, I think some people inflate his power, but I also think that he, sorry, I was reading a comment. I think he does have some sort of power. I think the Bible does say that he is powerful in that respect. I don't know this exact scripture quote there, but I do think he does have some sort of power. I just don't know how far it goes. So
okay, can he command storms? Can he create a storm?
I don't think so. I think
okay.
creative powers are not within his purview. I think whatever God allows him to do, he'll end up having that power from that point to whenever God says, "Oh, taking it."
So
Taking it back.
he can't touch weather. So when
I don't know.
Christians say things like Satan's causing this storm and killing people, or causing a drought, or holding back the rain, that's not actually happening in your mind.
Not in my mind, no.
It couldn't happen. He doesn't
It
have that
couldn't
kind of
happen.
power. Okay, yeah, okay, great. So you said deceive. I want to touch on the, because I know that everyone on the panel is going to say some form of deceive. Does Satan have telepathy? Can he?
What do you mean?
Get
What
in-
do you mean? What do you? Can he get in my head by like?
Yeah, can he get in your
whispering my
head?
ear?
Yeah.
I don't think he can read my thoughts, but I think he can probably orchestrate.
If he can't
ways
read
to
your
find
thoughts,
me.
how does he communicate with you?
I don't think he does communicate with me in that way.
He doesn't communicate. Okay.
No, there's no little devil on my shoulder like there is yours,
Mine's not little.
Oh,
My
man.
devil, that is.
Uh,
So, okay. So then, how does he deceive? Then, if is it all indirection? Tell me.
I
give
think
me.
I think so. I think
Okay.
it
So
could
give
be
me
all
like a
interaction.
workflow of a deception that Satan would do.
That's a good. I don't think I would know how to really describe one, but I think I don't know. I could see him orchestrating something, but I don't know exactly how that would look unless
So
I've
if he's
actually
going to
lived through it or
orchestrate it, at some
experienced it.
point he's got to get his hands involved in something and
Yeah.
move something. I mean, you've got to move the first lever in order to get this this machine going. So he's got to talk to somebody, whisper to somebody, make a
Yeah, he could. I don't know how that would look.
put a
Yeah.
rock in the road so that a car hits. You got to do something.
I think the comments are really helpful here when they're talking about possession to the unbeliever. I think that could be a possible way, a possible power, so to speak, is being able to control someone's body. So I think that could be a way.
If you can control your body, then it seems simpler to just be able to say something in your mind. That would be
I mean, if he does, maybe it's through an influence of some sort. Like I said, I'm not sure how that would look. I've never heard him, so I can't really say, or if I have, I don't know.
Right. But I mean, even to influence, you have to be able to do something. I can influence people, but you know how I influence people? I turn on a microphone every week, every goddamn week. And I do a lot of preparation and a lot of hard work. And there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes, a lot of stuff that happens in front of the scenes, and you can say that I influenced them, but there was nothing supernatural about it. You can trace the workflow of how that happened, right? And then you can trace the workflow of the study in preparation that I did in my lifetime to get to this.
Absolutely.
To this place.
Absolutely.
So if you're going to say that Satan is influencing, you can't rob him of all ability to actually influence. You've got to, at some point, he's got to enter into the world and do something to influence somebody.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's I think he is in the world. And I think that, like everything you just described is perfect in that there's like you turn on a microphone and you whisper, or not, let's say not whisper, you talk into a microphone, but you also write too, and you can influence people that way. I think there's several ways that can happen. The power of the pen, the power of knowledge.
Is Satan somewhere in a body writing things? Is he turning on a microphone talking to things? Or is is he?
There's could be,
because you said he's not talking directly to minds.
It could be. It could. I don't know if he is. I mean, maybe he does in certain instances.
Hey, Dale,
there are people that do claim that experience, like what's his name, Ted Bundy, for example.
Dale, you understand the question that I'm asking before I get to you, because I know that you've done a little bit more research on this. I think, Mr. Attack, I'm going to throw it to you. What are Satan's powers? He lies, deceives, influences. How does he do any of that? What exactly is he doing? What do we need to be worried about?
All right. 2 Corinthians 4:4. He is blinding the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the glory of Christ. Okay, so what does that look like? In China, it looks like Christians are being thrown in prison. Other Chinese are being told, don't even read the Bible. Don't even come close. If you read the Bible, you're going to jail, or we're going to kill you. What does that look like in a place like?
Well, hang on. Yes, they're being thrown in prison and physically stopped worshiping. What
Yeah.
is Satan's part of that though? How did he start that?
How does he keep people from from getting the gospel by like
Yeah,
influencing?
because what you're describing things that people are doing. So I can say that people in China who have maintained a certain kind of political system, a certain kind of ideology and rule, have reasons to stop Christianity. Okay, I don't chalk that up to Satan, but you're saying that Satan is doing this, and so I'd
Yeah.
like to know how Satan is doing it. How does Satan get that ball rolling?
From a spiritual realm where like he influences the intentions of men who are like, okay, we don't want Christianity in our country because
How does he influence the intentions?
well, could I keep going?
Yes, I just want you to understand the question.
Yeah. I fully get your question. You're asking how does that happen? And I'm saying the intentions of men. Okay, how does he do that? People have desires, right? People can desire good things. I want to go help my neighbor, or I want to consolidate power for myself. Satan can influence that by making your desire for something else that is contrary to what is good. So like he can like set up circumstances in terms of like I'm not saying I don't know how he does this, but like set up desires like temptations in your path that you will fall for, so that your intentions align with his intentions, and in turn you go ahead and do something that stops the spread of the gospel of Christ. So in terms of Chinese citizens, where you go ahead and throw your neighbor in jail because they're preaching Christianity, and we don't want that here because we want to stay separate from the rest of the world. We just want to keep our Buddhism. We want to stay with the president, to worship him. So keep that Christianity out of here. So Satan can influence someone like that. Another way that can happen is, of course, the way that's common to my experience is that go turn on the television and see violence and see all sorts of pornographic content over there that's being projected to the minds of young children and influencing how they think about life, and that has a domino effect on just how someone lives their life. And
Okay, I understand that, but I feel like, yeah, I feel like you're not quite getting the question though. I'm gonna give it over to Dale. We have it a couple of times. I need somebody to workflow that for me. So you're using a lot of kind of magical language and a lot of vague language. He influenced your intentions. Well, first of all, he doesn't know your intentions because he can't read your mind. And he's not talking to anyone directly. I'll let David Russell, so I'll accept that. So at some point, in order for him to get the dominoes falling, he's got to do something in this world so that you can say Satan did that, as opposed to that man used his own free will to do that. Where do we see Satan's hand in anything?
There's the thing. I'm not separating the two. So like, again, let me just stick to the biblical categories in here. I'm not saying that this is the ultimate view. I'm just saying that I'm just sticking to what I see from the Bible. So this is this instance where Jesus and Peter are hanging out, and Peter says, "No, you won't go to the cross." And Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." Everyone knows this story. And Peter didn't want Jesus to go to the cross. And Jesus says, "Peter, you're thinking worldly, like you have the things of Satan on your mind." So whereas Peter is doing a natural act, he probably thinks saying Jesus, hey, don't go die for the sins of the world is a good thing. Those intentions are being influenced and merged by Satan's intentions. So like a person can do things or have intentions for things, especially relating to the world or worldly desires, that to them they seem natural. Like, okay, me throwing someone in jail for practicing the wrong faith, that can seem like a naturalistic reason. But I'm saying like what the Bible says, how Satan influences people is he tells them to set their minds on worldly things.
He tells them, this is the first word. This is the first thing that anyone said that constitutes a workflow. He tells them how.
By influencing their intentions, like I just said.
Okay. And there goes the whole thing. And we had a good start there. I'm gonna cut you off right there just for the sake of time. Dale,
Dale's not here, my friend.
Where'd Dale go?
Dale had an emergency. He had to leave real quick. Okay.
Oh, dang alicious. Okay, then you're back, Mac. So what I'm what I'm trying to get you to, and you can jump in here too, if you want, Russell. I'm trying to get somebody to work for this. So let me see if I can explain it. The kind of question that I'm asking, so that you can understand, so that you can answer the actual question that I'm asking. I don't want you to feel frustrated, and I don't want to feel frustrated. Nobody likes frustration. That's the devil making us frustrated. So the devil is in his place. He's in his realm, wherever he is. Okay, he's there, and he has his limitations. And we're here. So let's just use me as an example. I'm here, the devil's there. The devil wants me to do something. How do we get from point A, devil wants me to do something, to point B, him then communicating with somehow with nature to get me to want to do that thing, to point C, me doing the thing? I need you to workflow how the devil from where he is to where I am gets me to do anything, or influences me in any way.
You're asking me to describe the role of a supernatural being. So like, here's the thing, like the answer that I give you is not going to be satisfactory, but I'm still going to give it anyway. All right. So like, you have Satan, he's in the spiritual realm, and we have us here. So like in the spiritual realm, there are things going on there in terms of like what people desire, in terms of like spiritual fulfillment, or this was going to make me feel more fulfilled in life if I do this. So Satan will push things into your face, will put temptations, like we were just talking about Jesus putting the temptation of kingdoms of the world. Okay, you can rule over these kingdoms, because Satan knows that every person on the planet desires to have some sort of power. So he puts that in front of you, and he says, you know, it's better, this is much better than worshiping God. You want to put all your energy into this worldly thing, and I don't want you to care about all that God stuff. I want you to care about worldly things. That's how Satan influences people of all cultures, and people of different cultures have different priorities in terms of what they what they prioritize. So someone in China prioritizes something different than someone in America. So Satan knows, if I put this in front of someone in China, that person won't care. So he puts a temptation, he puts it right in front of, dangles right in front of their face and says, this is more important than God. Pay attention to this. Don't care about all that other stuff about God. Care about this. So that's how Satan can influence a person to sin.
Okay, so you said supernatural being, and my question deals with supernatural power, and I'm still not understanding the supernatural power that you're saying that he has to do any of this.
Temptation. That's it.
But temptation is not a supernatural power.
Orchestrating things to tempt someone across the world, that is supernatural. Like, I can't do that. Like, how could I do that? Like, how can I tempt someone by putting? But
your head canoning that Satan is the one who set up the dominoes and tipped the first domino.
I'm not.
And I'm simply saying everything that you're saying now can be explained naturally with humans being human.
And so I acknowledged that. I said, like, okay, from our perspective, everything we do, we're doing it naturally. But
then how do you know that Satan is doing anything at all?
Because I'm saying I don't separate the two. I'm not saying like, okay,
but why don't you separate the two? Everything that you have described can be fully 100% explained in human terms. Why would we need to add a Satan to that?
But this show is about how Satan acts in the world, right? So if Satan is acting in the world, it's going to look like the world that we know of. It's not going to look like things are dangling from the
So it sounds like Satan acting is indistinguishable from Satan not being there at all.
No, I'm not saying that. There are acts where, like, obviously you can look at someone like Stalin or Hitler murdering millions of people and think, okay, well,
no, I don't see demonic there.
I'm explaining it to you so that you can understand where I'm coming from. I know already you don't see it that way. Okay, I'm not saying you have to see it.
So I just want you to explain it in terms of where at least somebody listening to you could say, oh, well, that could only happen because of satanic superpower. Everything that you have said is 100% human explainable.
And I'm saying yes, but I'm saying, like, since this show is in the context of like, okay, how does Satan operate in the world, right? That's what we are asking. And I'm saying he operates by putting temptations. And you're saying, okay, humans can do that. We can explain that. And I'm saying, I agree. Yes, that's true. That's totally right. I'm not disagreeing. But I'm saying that Satan's domain is that he can set up things in the natural world that influence you to make decisions that you otherwise wouldn't make if he wasn't influencing you in a specific way.
Okay, I'm gonna let that stand. Fourth point. We're almost out of here. We're out of here. I'm not satisfied with that segment, but I do. I'm not happy. But I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let it go. I think that you've made the case the best way you can, and I don't see any point in pushing you further
Because
there. So
what
I'm
you're
not.
asking is that I can point to an action like that action and say, okay, everyone on the planet has to acknowledge that.
What you didn't give me was a single superpower that I could say Satan has a superpower to do this, and therefore Christians need to watch out because Satan can do this thing. And all you're really doing is telling me things that humans can and do. And I have no reason to assume a Satan. Even Christians have no reason to assume that Satan's doing anything.
But David, like the point of this, right, is to go to the Bible, because like when you're writing articles about Christianity, you quote from the Bible. So when I quote from the Bible and say, okay, this passage over here tells me how Satan acts in the world, and you say, okay, well, that doesn't satisfy me. I don't know. You want me to tell you what I think? Like Satan is like a magician somewhere who just pops up, and there's a show somewhere in the Netherlands or something, and there's weird things going. Like I genuinely cannot wrap my head around how this answer that you're expecting could square like everything else with everything else that you believe.
Even the Bible doesn't talk about Satan's powers per se. This is why Christians had a disagreement with it about this.
I mean, David, to be fair, I mean, if we're looking at the Bible, I did give you some examples that I thought were pertinent when the temptations of Jesus were going on.
Right, so but he was talking to Jesus, and you're saying that Satan doesn't talk to us.
I don't.
So that doesn't really apply, does it?
Yeah, but here's the thing: like how that relates to me, I don't know. But if I'm looking basically Scripture and saying what he can do versus what he's done with me,
well, I'm kind of asking how it relates to us today. Well, I mean, I'm not asking how it relates to a one-off kind of thing.
And that's what I'm saying is that we don't know fully how it relates in every aspect of our life, right? So
kind of what I'm saying. Nobody knows what his power is.
Well, if we trust the Bible, and that's the thing, like that's where we go back to the Bible. Well, Satan can do this and do that, but maybe he communicates differently with other people, such as the son of Sam.
Okay, this is after show. This is after show kind of material. I recognize this, but I just want to. Let me just ask this question straight up. One of the reasons I'm a little bit handcuffed is because I said that I wouldn't talk about this. So I just need to. You can just give me a yes or no. This is not a hard question. Can Satan possess people today?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we got two yeses. Okay, so you guys are welcome to stick around the after show. We can talk that out, but just know that any skeptics that happen to be in there, they're open to that show too. But I'd love to hear it. I'm going to keep my word, and I'm going to keep that out of this show because no one came prepared for it, and it's last minute edition. So number 4, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit. I know that we're not going to have a complete discussion over this, but spiritual war, people, spiritual war. Once again, I can say this is another one of those things that as a Christian, I did not understand. Thankfully, I didn't have to talk about it all that much. Most of the people in my religion were either too smart or too confused to ask that much about the spiritual war. But there are things that Christians are used to saying when you're what I would call talking Christianly. You use kind of Christian language, buzzwords about things, and then nobody questions you, except when you're in a Bible class situation, and then some questions come up, and people just kind of shrug their shoulders and move on to the next passage because it's confusing. So, spiritual war. I really hate that Dale could not be here to talk about this because he really wanted to, was looking forward to reprise this subject a little bit. And so who knows, maybe in the summer we'll get a chance to do that with Dale. But let me just ask the most basic question. What is the spiritual war? Anybody?
David, go first. I've been talking for a while.
No, Mac, go ahead. I got to take care of something real quick.
All right.
Mac, you're the star of this show anyway. So people want to hear what you got to say. What is the spiritual war?
They kind of just abandoned me here. All right.
It was always going to be you, Mac. So,
all right. So we have a natural realm and we have a spiritual realm, and the spiritual realm has to do with things that pertain to like what we as humans spiritually crave, like just in, like I would say that this pertains more to believers as opposed to someone who is not a Christian. So like when Paul talks about spiritual warfare, he is addressing it to Christians. Like Christians have to go through these things like persecutions and our inner struggles, our temptations, our interactions with the world, and what the New Testament teaches in terms of like spiritual warfare is that there are times when it feels like a temptation is getting the better of you, or it's gone the better of you, and it feels like, okay, maybe I'm not a Christian, maybe I'm just faking this whole thing. And so like the point of spiritual warfare is to tell you, okay, you're not just wrestling against these outside forces or like the natural things that you can see, that there are other forces at work that are kind of like tampering with your faith, and that are trying to get you to abandon the faith or just become like ineffective in your walk. And so you are supposed to be vigilant by putting on this full armor of God that's in Ephesians 6. And so Christianity isn't just mostly about coasting or just, like you're just, there for the ride. You're supposed to be vigilant against these elemental forces that are there trying to like put you off balance, or trying to get you from being holy as God is holy, or trying to get you from the path. And that's not to say that when a Christian sins that necessarily, like there was this story I heard once of this lady who didn't go to church, who just never wanted to go to church, and her pastor, I was like, well, why haven't you been coming to church? And she said, Satan told me not to go to church. Told you not. Like that's not a situation where like that applies, because it's not that our physical actions per se are being influenced directly. It's more like in terms of what's going on in the background, what's going on in the heart dimension, in the spiritual realm. Like,
okay, how long has the spiritual war been going on?
It's been going on since the fall of man. So like,
okay, but now, so the reason I'm asking is because the fall of Satan, early in the show, the first segment we had, it was described that Satan was wicked from the beginning, and we had agreed that beginning was before our beginning. So it's a different beginning. Was the spiritual war underway at that time?
Spiritual war between man and...
Well, no, the spiritual war writ large. I mean, it seems like there was some kind of war, because
like an actual war that's going on that we don't know about.
Right. Like because Satan was warring against God, right? He was warring against God's will. So would that be a part of the spiritual war?
That would be a different category, sure, of spiritual warfare.
So that was going on before we got here.
I'm talking about a different one here. I'm talking about like the one that believers have to go through.
So, but wouldn't it be fair to say that we were just sucked into an existing war? So that there's a war between these great superpowers, you call them gods or whatever, and so we get created and we get sucked into it. Are you saying that the war didn't really start proper until we were here?
I'm saying it became relevant, like we entered the war on the wrong side. We joined the...
Okay, but there was a war and then we joined it. It was already pre-existent, is what I'm trying to get at. So
That's fair to say.
So if there was no war, and I'm asking you to headcanon here, so I know that there's no Bible
Okay.
passage that you can point to. But Christians do this kind of thing when they're talking to each other, not on a mic. So it's just us Christians here, Mac. Can you imagine that humans would have done better, whatever better looks like? I'm not saying perfect, but better, if we had come into a world where there was no war going on.
Better as in pleasing to God, or because like obviously we all have different, I think on the show we all have
Yeah.
different starting points.
Less sinful. If there was nobody influencing us from the other side, would we have possibly made better choices? Would we have done better?
I would have to still say no, because ultimately what
Then the
matters.
war is irrelevant.
No. What I'm saying is this: when I think about what happened in the garden, I think that before even the serpent approached Adam and Eve, what was going on is that perhaps in that moment, that opportune moment that the serpent saw, Adam and Eve at some whatever point in time, their reliance on God, their dependence on God was not where it should have been. So in terms of like, again, what we were talking about before with the devil himself sinning in heaven, like there, and Dale kind of said it in a really very, very good way in terms of like how the will needs to be maintained to like, so like if I say I love someone, I need to like maintain that love. I can't just be doing the same things I'm doing. I have to be keeping up the relationship, so to speak, stoking the fire. So when I think of like what happened in the garden, is that there was perhaps a moment in time there where Adam and Eve, their dependence on God like waned, and it went to a place where it shouldn't have. And so
Okay.
that's what
But
I'm saying.
I just want you to think about this. So I'm not trying to beat you up here. I just want you to think about something that maybe you haven't thought about before or in this way. But if what you're saying is we would have fallen anyway, and we'd be just as bad as we are now with no devil and no spiritual war, what do we need? What do we need the devil for? And what does the devil's superpowers have to do with anything? Then I mean, why does the devil need to deceive us since we were going to deceive ourselves? Why does the devil need to influence us since we were going to be influenced that way anyway?
I'm not saying that we would be the same level of bad, but I'm just saying that we would.
Okay, well, you did say. Okay,
again,
let me
what
ask the
happened-
question again. Would we be better without the devil and without the spiritual war?
Would we be better without being tempted? Of course we would. Like heaven, we won't have to wrestle against some other being trying to influence us. We
Then
would be better in that sense.
you think it would have been responsible then and loving for God to not let this war go on and drag us down in it? What shouldn't we have had the better opportunity?
That comes down to God's purposes in allowing this world to play out the way we did. And I don't think any creature can look at what God planned and say, you made an unwise, you can't say that to an eternal being without it being absurd or illogical to
Okay,
do.
well then give me some headcanon then, because it's absurd and illogical now. If you're saying that we could have been better without this war and without Satan influencing us and constantly doing the magical things that he's doing, whatever those things are, and God could have stopped it, then why are we caught up in a spiritual war that we frankly don't have anything to do with and shouldn't have been caught up in?
I'm sorry, I got distracted by a comment. And these comments are so weird. Would we have been better? Sure. But like, what was God's purpose in creating the world? God's purpose was, created the world was to display his glory and his attributes through Christ. So God created this world so that Christ could enter into it and conquer it, so that we, like those who believe in him, would be the direct beneficiaries of his atoning
Right.
work.
And wouldn't that have been done better? Wouldn't more souls have been saved had we not had this war where Satan is influencing people?
I don't know about more souls, and this dives into the issue of questioning God's intentions. Like, okay, would I have been able to do better? And I think that that's kind of it comes down to this. When we start, even when I was contemplating coming on this show, like I knew we would get to this point where it would be like, okay, the only solution becomes creating a different world where this character does not exist, right? Like it would have been better. But like I'm saying, like from what I read from the Bible, is like God does not do anything willy-nilly. He doesn't allow for things to happen
Right. It's
purposely.
everything that happens is on purpose and it's God's intention. I get that. But if I wanted to be really nasty, I could have asked, why did why did God allow Satan to rise to power and be number two in heaven
Number
in the
two,
first place? Or whatever Satan was, he was powerful enough to take a third of the angels with him, and God knew that this would happen. Why did God give him that much power and responsibility? That because God should have known that with that much power, his pride would have run away. Why not put some other angel in his place that wouldn't have done that? And the only thing you can say was, well, any angel would have done that, which is
no,
bad design. Or you can say that God, he knew it would happen. He set it up that way because he wanted the ensuing spiritual war to happen for his own great glorious reasons. Now, I think that's where Christians have to end up, but I think that's also where skeptics have to get off the bus.
because you don't like that God has a purpose in allowing things to happen.
That he has a purpose in creating a Satan that would do this, that he knew would do this, and that he would drag us down when he knew that we would do better if Satan wasn't there.
All right, so let me ask you a question. I don't have kids, but like if I have kids in the future, and I know like if I do the best I can as a parent, but I know that in the future that child is going to mess up in some way. They're probably gonna do something that is contrary. That am I a bad parent for wanting to have kids?
Well, first of all, you're laying on your human limitations on a God
Well,
who you don't
well,
think has those same
no,
limitations.
this has nothing to do with limitations. I'm just asking, like,
Well, it does though, because if you know that your child, the child that is not born yet, but you know that that child, but you know that when he's born, you can look into the future and know that he's going to set off a nuclear holocaust that's going to destroy the world. If you know that and your selfish desire to have that child wins out over you not having a child, then you are evil.
a selfish desire. But we're talking about my desire as a parent, right? We were saying
Right,
like,
which
okay,
is a selfish desire. You should, if you know that the child you are going to spawn is going to destroy the world, you know that absolutely. But you think, well, I just want to be a parent though, because I've got this drive and I want to do it. Yeah, you are a monster.
but we're not talking about nuclear holocaust here. We're talking about parents and
Well,
children.
we're
and
talking something much worse than nuclear
I
holocaust.
mean,
We're talking about
you guys can speculate about this all day, but if God had a morally sufficient reason to do everything that he did and choose a world in which this is going to play, and David, I'm agreeing with you to an extent too. If this is where you have to get off the bus because you just simply can't trust this God that we believe in, this Christian God, then that's on you, man. That's what you have to do. But if you can't speculate one way or another because you're just not in a position to know it.
okay,
And this,
but
I know this is your Mullinus defeater and you hate it, but this is where the conversation has to end at some point. Is can you accept this or not? And if you can't accept that God has a morally sufficient reason of why all these things go and why these things have to happen, and he did it for a reason that you can't possibly know because you're not an omniscient being or anything, then I'm sorry. That's where you have to get off the train.
I would I would need you as Christians, if you want to have a case at all, to be able to at least tell some kind of story of why that would need to happen. What is this morally sufficient reason when you can admit that without Satan in the spiritual war, we do better, but we need Satan. God needs Satan in the spiritual war that you can't even define, to put the kind of pressures on us that we have. And you're saying to me, well, you should just accept it. Accept that God is good and he has good intentions for unleashing the worst creature we could imagine, the one who brings down the world in something worse than nuclear holocaust. Just accept it and praise God for it is not sufficient.
I don't think any Christian has said that. What I think David Russell just said brilliantly is that at some point you have to, like, we make all these arguments, but then we work our way back to that. Like, do you trust that an omniscient God would know things that you don't know? Like, would allow for something to happen that you personally, from your vantage point, would accept? Like, for me, like, I read the Bible and I see that how God operates is he sent his son to die on the cross for sinners, and that involved a lot of pain. And I'm like, okay, why didn't God just forgive from heaven, But like, God had a purpose in sending his son. He wanted to demonstrate something about his character, and he wanted to relay that information.
All right, but if
in
he
a
didn't
spe-
want
in a
us to fall
specific
in the
way,
first place, he didn't
in a
have to
specific,
send. He didn't
in
have
a
to
specific,
send the Satan to tempt us to fall. He didn't have to, So then you're
but,
saying, well, he
but, but, but
really, really wanted this crucifixion story, and if he hadn't sent the Satan, maybe he wouldn't have got it. That just sounds. That sounds.
that's not what I'm saying, because Adam and Eve are also held responsible. It's not that, oh, Satan made us do it, and so Satan was the only one who got punished for it. That's not what happened in the account.
Right, but what we have in the account is a story of a man and a woman who were doing fine until they ran into a diabolically evil being that God created and put there in the garden to tempt them.
But
That's what you can headcanon that they would have done the same thing.
I'm not
without Satan. Okay, well, it's kind of no. I'm just reading the story. This is just a story. The story is they didn't fall, they didn't sin, they didn't do anything before their encounter with the demon. That's how the story reads. To suggest that it would have been otherwise is you headcanoning. That's not me headcanoning. That's just me reading.
By eating, and I read the same story as you, and I reach a different conclusion because I see them declaring an independence from God. They're saying, we're not going to trust God. We're going to listen to this creature that's telling us all these other stories without
there should have never been a creature in there telling them, and there didn't have to be.
Why not?
How do you know that, David? How do you know that this creature didn't have to be there? How do you know that for sure? You don't.
Because God made the garden with all of the things in it.
All I'm saying is that there comes to a point where you have to trust in God, and there is that point. And the reason I trust in God is because all the other evidence, everything else that I've read about his nature, I believe. So there are certain things from my vantage point that I do have to place my trust in. That's why I said if you have to.
So in other words, just don't ask about that stuff. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't ask that question. Don't engage your brain over that. Just accept it.
We could speculate it all day, but what am I going to base my faith on at the end of the day?
It's not just about speculation. It's about engaging. It's about engaging your brain.
Yeah,
and we have that to engage.
Exactly, and we can engage to a point, but there is a point where you have to say
where you got to shut off your brain and stop thinking.
If you want to look at it that way, sure.
Well, that's kind of what you're saying, because you sounds like you're getting upset because I would dare ask the question of why God would put a demon down here.
Never said that.
Oh, really?
All we said is that there's a point in which God did do what he did.
There's a point where he did what he did, and you just can't ask any further. You can't inquire further. No, that's the same thing.
No, we're just saying you're not in a position to know.
That's the same thing.
And
you're saying you can't inquire further.
Not to say you can't inquire. You can always try to discover why, and like I said, we can speculate on it all day.
So absolutely. What we're saying is ultimately, David, you have to make the decision. We always, I think we kind of hit this roadblock every time. It's like this happened, and then we go back and we reiterate backwards, and it's the point where it's like, okay, you want me to tell you why God decided for things to pan out the way they did.
I think this is why
you an answer because I'm not omniscient, and we're saying you're not in a position to know or tell an omniscient God why he should do things the way you want them to do. You're not.
I think this is why more atheists are being created every day. Because if you can't push past this wall, and if you're ultimately going to tell people, this is the point where your thinking has to stop because you can't possibly know the rest of the
David,
story.
I gave
It's
you the answer to that question. The question is that God's ultimate purpose in creating the world was to demonstrate his attributes, and those attributes involved sending his son to die on the cross for redeemed sinners, and that couldn't happen if God didn't allow Jesus to enter into a world full of suffering, where he experiences all that so that he can be able to relate to our experience.
you're not painting the
All right,
kind of picture that
David,
would make me want to.
David. We got Dale here now. He's back.
Okay.
Why don't you ask the question to Dale again, and we'll let his response come in. I'm glad we were able to draw it out so he could come back.
Dale, I'm glad
I'm
you're
being
back.
host
I
right
was
now.
I was just getting ready to close out here. So what I'm going to do, Dale, since we have had a fairly lively discussion on this, we didn't actually get that deep in the spiritual war idea. What I want you to do, I know that you had some notes and thoughts about the spiritual war. I just want you to talk about that a little bit. If you were able to hear some of what's gone before, you can respond to it. But wind this up in kind of your closing thoughts, and we'll close out after you.
Spiritual war.
Yeah. So were you able to hear any of that conversation at all?
No, 'cause I was just kind of like setting up.
All right, that's okay. Let me just set you up real quick then. So one of the reasons we didn't get very far in the conversation is I asked what the spiritual war even was, and we got to a place where I was asking, well, when did it start? And there was a little bit of confusion about that. Did it start at the beginning of Adam and Eve sinning, or was it already underway? And did Adam and Eve kind of get swept up in a spiritual war that was already happening? I won't tell you what answers came from whom. I'll just let you work with that. And we got to a place where I asked the question, well, if just hypothetically speaking, if there wasn't a spiritual war going on and there wasn't a Satan influencing humans, would humans do better? And so there's a little bit of a two-edged sword there. If you say no, humans wouldn't have done better, then I don't see the point of Satan having any superpowers to influence at all. We don't need him to influence. We would have been just as bad without him. So why have him? And if we would have done better, then the edge is even sharper. So why was he allowed to be there if you can acknowledge that we would have done better? So those are some of the conversations, and it got to a place where Mullism, you just have to believe that God had a reason for it. Shut up. So that's kind of a brief summary of it. I'll let you have the last word, and like I said, you can kind of wrap it up in your closing thoughts. Overall, take as much time as you want.
Okay, so in terms of the spiritual war, when did it begin? I think I would say it began with the fall of humans, because I think what's the aim of the spiritual war? It's to spare as many souls from damnation. That's what the spiritual war is about. So I think it began at the fall of human beings. Even though there were sinful beings that rebelled against God and fell and that sort of thing, there wasn't a war at that point. There was nothing to fight over because God had already dealt with them. So yeah, the war began with human beings with the fall. And the second question, sorry, what was the second question again? On spiritual war, what do you? Sorry, I just forgot.
Yeah. Okay. I had muted myself there.
Dale's on opioids. He's gonna forget a little bit.
Yeah, that's
another
that's
podcast
okay.
in bed. It's crazy.
Yeah. So the question was, what's the point of the Satan character at all? So would we have been the same level of evil that we are today without him? And if so, why did we need him for in the first place? Why would God need him? What's the point of him? Why have a tempter if we don't need to be tempted? Why have a deceiver if we blind ourselves? If we would have been better without him, then it's a harder question of why was he allowed to be here to make us worse than what we would have been?
Yeah, so I do think that in a sense we would be better without Satan and that sort of thing, because Satan and demons do play a negative role against uh, the servants of God and human beings in general. They're actively working against God and that sort of thing. Um, now, um, so in that sense, yeah, on that level, we can say that things are worse with Satan and his demons. However, you mentioned Molinism, so I'm pretty sure that's David R. that said that, because we're the same on that front. So I think, in a sense, that the world that we have where Satan and demons exist is overall better than a world that didn't have Satan and demons in it in terms of the overall value of the world. Else God wouldn't have created this world with Satan and demons in it in the first place. He would have created the world without them. So if that's what Dave, the person you mentioned, Molinism, I'm pretty sure it was David R, but maybe it was MacTac, I don't know. That's what they would be saying, is that, yeah, it is better with Satan and demons in it overall, because more souls will be saved as a result of God creating this world. But yeah, just speaking on a human level, obviously they are a negative force in their own right. They're actively working against God saving people, or God having an eternal loving relationship with human beings forever, and that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Not really, but I'm going to let you off the hook because I know that I know some of what you're going through there, and I appreciate you stepping in. Mac Attack, closing remarks, please.
Yeah, it's again, it's been a lively show. Thank you for having me on. There's a lot that I would have wanted to say that I didn't get a chance to say. But all I'll close it is with, like, I'm sorry, I can't even talk right now. So all right, God created the world, the universe, the sphere, everything, and He created it with a purpose, for a purpose. And so, like, there's always there's a dichotomy going on. Can you accept that God allows for things to happen with a purpose, an omniscient God, to allow to let things happen with a purpose? Or are you going to, like, say, oh, God's just like me, God doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow, God doesn't know if there's going to be another COVID next year, God doesn't know what's going to happen with his subordinates? Like, there has to be, you have to make a choice. It has to be one of those two. And what I see often happening, especially when I'm on the forums and other places, is that people will most often say that God doesn't know what's going to happen. God is just reacting to what's going to happen. And so when it comes to the topic of Satan, God created Satan with a purpose, and that purpose has been lived out by Satan. And actually, the passage that I was going to go to actually has to relate with Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul is saying, okay, I'm being tormented by messengers of Satan. And Paul says, I prayed to God, asking for these tormentors, these demons that were tormenting him in some way, to be released, to be taken away. And God does not answer the prayer. God says, you're going to have to, my grace is sufficient for you in this problem. So that instance, and another instance where Paul is also, like, suffering, and God allows for this tormenting to keep going on, because Paul had been receiving so much revelation. It had this effect of causing him to be conceited. So Satan wants Paul to be conceited. God doesn't want Paul to be conceited or prideful. So Satan is being used to torment Paul in order to reduce conceit. So God is using Satan's plans to frustrate Satan's plan. So that's what I see when I read the Bible. I see someone who's declaring independence from God and is trying to set up for themselves their way, thinking that they're frustrating God's plans, but in the end of it, they're actually serving God, like they're sanctifying Paul's Christian walk. So I genuinely get saddened, like almost to the point of tears, when I see atheists on the panels or on forums or chat saying, "Oh, Satan's the good guy, Satan's a bro," or whatever. Because here you have an adversary. You have someone who is deceiving you on earth and accusing you in heaven. Everyone has a file of what they've ever done, and they're being accused daily, day and night, about everything that they've ever done. And you can't cozy up to a being like that and then think, okay, well, at the judgment day, I'll just be able to say, well, you allowed for this being to be there in the first place. I don't think that's going to fly, because every single action that happens, every single act that we commit on this planet, we do it because we want to do it. It doesn't matter if I speed down the highway and I'm doing 75 instead of 50, and I get pulled over and the officer says, "Why were you speeding?" And I say, "I was doing it." Well, there was another influence, my wife is giving birth or something. The officer is not gonna let me go and say, "Oh yeah, well, sure. I mean, those other influences, you're still going to get a ticket." And so my plea to anyone who's listening to this is that argument that you think you have is not going to be able to stand, precisely because you are a creature who has the freedom of choice. You make choices all the time. And when you choose to do something, regardless of whether you think you're doing it by yourself or you're doing it because someone else made you do it, that choice still is attached to you. And the reason God allowed for a being like this to exist is to, again, as described in scripture, and maybe in another show we can cover it, was to allow for Christ to be magnified in the lives of those who believe in him, so that when a Christian is sent to prison or is put to death for their faith, that person is magnifying God by pointing to God and saying, that is what I value the most. I value God. I value God more than I value my life. I value God more than I value my freedom. And that act of Satan serves the act of a Christian being put to death in a Chinese prison somewhere. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say. I have more to say, but I'm going to cut it short there. Thank you for having me on the show. It was nice hanging out with you guys. Thank you, David Russell. Thank you, Dale. And yeah, hope to talk to you guys more. Thanks.
Sure. And you can come back and continue your thoughts on Satan. I've got a feeling that the first show of season 4 will be Satan part 2. Just have a feeling. I know a guy. So with that, Russell, closing thoughts.
Do you have a closing thought?
I do, but
I'll go last. Let me go last.
You want to go last, huh?
Yeah, I'll go last.
Great. Okay, that's fine. It's this, and it's pretty brief. The Satan story is incoherent from start to finish. There's no part of it that makes sense at all. When you start with an all-powerful, all-loving God, when that's your starting point, it doesn't, the Satan story just doesn't fit in. It can't get off the ground. And I think that the Jews understood that, which is why they didn't really start with a Satan character as we understand Satan today. But I do think that they understood a basic problem with a God story. And one of the basic problems with the God story is that it has to make sense of the reality that we live in currently. Right? So you can always imagine other realities before our time or in some other realm. But your story has to make sense of where we live right now, boots on the ground, price of a gallon of milk today. And it has always been the case. And it has always been the case that there are things in this world that happen to people that cannot be explained with an all-powerful, all-loving God alone. That just doesn't work. And so what you do, you invent human sin. Okay, great. Humans, they They chose to sin, but that doesn't explain it either. So that might work for a while if you are an immature people. That may work a little bit, but even that doesn't work for them for very long. And it shouldn't work for us at all, because no sin that we could commit on this earth can explain everything that's gone wrong. For instance, it can't explain changing human DNA to kick off birth defects and things like that. It can't change a creation that was somehow perfect without death to then suddenly have death after the fact, after we sin. Then it just kind of rewrites history, and then there's death. It can't change that. Supernovas are literally stars blowing the fuck up. And the Christians explain that by saying, well, sin, it works both forward and backward in time. So, maybe it wasn't that way before. It doesn't explain that. You can't put that weight on human evil. There's only so much we can do. We can't create hurricanes. We don't do that. We didn't create AIDS. We didn't create. There's just things that the story can't explain, doesn't make any sense of it. And so we've got to do something more. So we've got this all-powerful, all-loving God, but then we've got the reality that life is kind of shitty. And then so we try to blame it on humans, but humans can't explain it. So we need something else. And so I think that you kind of have to get to Satan somewhere along the line. You've got to get to that something else to explain everything that's going on around us. And so we have this supernatural ancient foe of God. I think the Bible even describes him as an ancient foe. But you've got to, you've got to get there some kind of way. And you've got to give this ancient foe some kind of power. And there's got to be enough power to explain everything that's going wrong in the world. Because the problem is you can't put everything that's going wrong in the world on God, because then he's not so all loving anymore, or he's not all powerful. There's something wrong. You can't live with a Molinistic answer long enough as humans. It just doesn't work for us to say, well, he's got to have some kind of plan. No, we've got to offload some of that evil onto something else. And it can't just be human, because it also has to be supernatural, because there's supernatural things, seemingly supernatural things, or things that are beyond the capability of humans to explain. And so we got to get a Satan somewhere. If your religious story is going to hold together and speak to the reality that we live in. And I just see it as religious people who need to believe in a God really badly. They have no choice. They have no choice but to also believe in a Satan. Because without Satan, it all just falls apart. And there's nothing coherent about the Satan story. You can't get it off the ground without putting some real chinks in God's armor. So finally, I would say, as far as accepting this Molinistic notion that you get to these questions, and at some point you just have to accept that, well, God has a plan. If any plan that God has that he doesn't explain to me that includes a Satan, I don't want any part of it. And I think that you should be bold enough to say you don't want any part of it either.
All right. Well, thank you, David, for your closing. I don't think I'll be as long, but I do want to note that we do live in a complicated reality. We live in a very real world, and that very real world challenges us, and it doesn't matter what I say or what I believe about Satan. What comes down to it is ultimately the truth. What best explains the evidence? In my opinion, I think God best explains the evidence. I think that an all-loving God actually explains the evidence. David says it doesn't make sense to him. I totally see where he's coming from, and I sympathize for him, but I disagree. I think that from a limited standpoint, we don't understand everything that is out there. We don't understand time. We understand it to a degree. We're finite creatures. And I think that there's plenty of evidence for a God. And I think there's one person that we did forget about throughout this whole thing, and that was Christ and what he did on the cross. And I don't say we just forgot about him, but this has been a show about Satan. And I think that Christ is God's way of coming into the world, redeeming a fallen world, a fallen creature, a fallen system. And in him, we have life and we have eternal life. So when I end, I think that more people should, instead of getting off the boat, should look deeper into why they should get on the boat. So yeah, that's pretty much my closing, guys. I thank everybody for being here. I thank David for his pushback. I thank all the skeptics that came in here and put our feet to the fire. I always appreciate it. And that's it for me. David, what else do we got going on?
All right. So next week is the last official show of the season. And it will be when some of these rowdy skeptics step in to have their say. So I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording right here. And I'm going to turn the recording back on. So this is the first and only time that this will happen, and do an after show with whoever remains with whatever energy they've got. I'm running on fumes, but I think that's when the after show gets good. And we're gonna have some conversation about demon possession, which we did not talk about here. This part of the discussion will air. I don't know if it'll air this week, but it'll air at some point. It may be a bonus show in the summer. We'll see how it goes. I don't expect it'll go too long, but it's an interesting topic, and there are a few people with some things to say about it. So anyone in the chat, you may feel free to unmute your mic. This is a very informal session. You don't have to unmute your mic. You just stay muted and see how it goes.